I think we're ready to go. All right, let's get this thing started. We're not live yet on the channel yet. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you everybody for coming tonight. Or first, real quick, let me just do a radio check, make sure everybody's good. Crit, you're good? Critically, thinking veteran, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
BX.
Yes.
Bryce.
Yep.
Rose.
Yep.
Dario.
Yep.
Race car.
Yep.
And Prime.
Yep.
All right, so we are good across the board. Awesome. Okay, thanks for being here tonight, guys. I appreciate you spending your evening with us here. We're going to go for roughly about 2 hours, 2 rounds, an hour apiece. I'm going to cover the rules when I do the intro once we're live as well, just so everybody's on the same sheet of music. I think we have a fairly balanced panel here. Rule number 1, in case you didn't read the rules in the Discord, or the Discord Drunken Debates official server channel. Rule 1, no ad hom, no name calling. There's no need for it. Let's keep it civil. No need for screaming or shouting over each other. If me as the moderator says please keep it down or whatever, and I have to correct you over 2 or 3 times, I'm going to remove you. The whole purpose of this is to have intellectual discussion. There's no need for insulting one another. Don't let this shit get to you, okay? Outside of that, have fun, and hopefully everybody is drinking tonight. When we start the show here in about 30 seconds, I'm going to step out of Discord. I'm going to do the intros. When I come back and you hear me say, all right, we're live, go ahead and cease talking, and then I'm going to intro each one of you, and you're going to have a minute to plug your socials, tell who you are, your political leaning, all that stuff, okay? Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. I'm going to step out of Discord real quick, and when I come back, we'll be live.
You guys are really talkative.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay.
I was ready to talk, but I was muted. I was like, hello.
Oh.
Yeah, BX, I'm actually quite surprised that like I live all the way up here in Cleveland, and we can get Shiner up here like all the time, and the strawberry one that you mentioned, I've seen it and I just haven't managed to pick it up yet.
Yeah, it's
But
good.
It's on the list.
When you guys think of Canadian beers, what comes to mind?
What's the
I don't think I've had one.
There's a triple IPA that I've had. That's
so I'm not a drinker.
I was there for a hockey tournament a few years ago.
Hopefully that's not going to be a problem, but yeah.
It's called the beer is called Sparkle Puff. It's a triple IPA.
I've heard of that one.
I decided to give this one a try.
It's like, dude,
I talked to John Burke actually one time, a long time ago. We had to get
Sparkle
a
Puff,
conversation.
that sounds very Canadian.
This is very, very long ago.
I don't know why. It
Wait,
just does.
True.
I doubt he even remembers me actually.
I don't know.
That doesn't make any
Sparkle
sense.
But it was GSU Gambit. Shout out to GSU Gambit who
I agree. I can't draw.
recommended me
I can't
for this,
draw
so
a
why we're here.
distinction on
Hopefully we'll have a
the
nice
name
time.
and it being Canadian,
Hi, little
but,
finger. Thanks
you
for being
know.
here, Gaylord.
Yeah.
Hello, hi.
But yeah,
open
I
up
mean,
their-
I play hockey and shit, so
Nice, dude. What do you
Yeah.
play, like defense, goalie?
We've had
right
BX
wing.
Bullet on the channel a few times.
Nice.
I thought you
Before.
said you were centrist.
We've had mixed interactions, but
What
But I shoot left.
I'd be happy to have her here again.
Therefore, that does make
Okay.
me centrist.
Playing both sides, I see.
Yeah.
Who's your team? Do you follow like pro hockey?
St. Louis, and they're
Oh,
playing
Spirit
in
Toby.
Columbus right now. And let me do a scorch.
just to
scorch-
pretend to get drunk.
Oh, they lost.
Just
That's a reference to the panel.
patiently waiting. We're just
Demotivated.
waiting for John Burke to get started. If you're new here, if you just arrived, we're just waiting for John Burke to
Sorry,
assist
my
thing
team is Tampa.
to get started. So
he's
we're just
probably gonna hate
chilling
me.
until that happens.
Oh no, I don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Being a
Usually-
St. Louis
And
fan,
we'll go from
you've got my bro
there.
on there. Fucking what's his name?
so
No,
Pat Maroon. Yeah, he's a one
Yeah, okay.
man
yeah.
dynasty.
it really is. Like that's
Just,
He's
uh,
won the
just-
it's
last
so
3
crazy.
Stanley
I mean,
Cups in a row, all 3 in a row.
just drink water,
know,
then you
and
can say
honestly,
you're
so they just
taking
made
a
that
drink
pretty
with
big.
some. I mean, yeah, I mean, I do have
Questionable
my
trade,
water, but I don't think anyone's
But
gonna think
I
this
feel
is
like they might actually
drinking
be able to
alcohol
make
out
it
of this thing.
because they just picked
But,
up a
yeah.
guy that like fills
And
the gap in their lineup.
if they didn't really want a non-drinker,
mad
I told them no before I
because,
was a non-drinker.
God,
So
when was the last time we've seen a
um,
three-peat?
hopefully,
a long time. It has been a
I
long
don't
What,
see an
time.
issue.
since
like the
anybody's drinking.
Islanders in the
other
80s?
person I know here, I know
think- yeah,
everyone
I think
here.
I read an article
I'm-
that said something along
well,
those
actually,
lines,
except
like
for this,
Islanders or something. Yeah, they picked up. So
Laku's
this is the crazy
person?
thing.
I don't know who
They,
this person is.
They traded
But everyone
2
else
first-round
I've
picks
had interactions
and
with.
2
Rose
of
has
their,
been a
like,
channel
pro-
person.
like, like,
Dario,
rookie
long time
forwards
ago.
for one
Long
guy,
time ago.
and he's not even like a
But we
top
love
6
Dario.
guy.
Dario's a good guy.
So like they gave a bunch of
CTV
shit
and all the
for
rest.
this. What's that guy's name?
Yep. So
Brandon Hagel. Brandon
Just
Hagel.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say the
Blackhawks.
guy from Chicago. Yeah.
Yep. And he's
Uh,
good. He is really good. And
because
good
looks like he's
defensive
wearing a
forward,
fake beard. He kind of does.
they gave a lot. Like,
Because race car, yeah.
They went all
he
in
does
on
look
that
like
to try to win this year.
like one of those cheap costume beards. Yeah,
I'm
dude, but
just
you're
really
right.
excited to see what Kyrie and Thomas come up together with, and God, those guys are gonna be
Yeah.
absolute.
All right, so we are currently live. Welcome to the second
Here we go.
Drunken Debates that we've had since the return of Drunken Debates. I want to thank all my panelists for being here tonight. First, I need to make sure that all comms are good. All right, so welcome back. Let's get this thing started. I know we don't have a lot of time for a few of the panelists tonight. We're going to go 2 rounds, 1 hour per round. Appreciate everybody being here tonight. All right. So before we get this thing going, my name is John Burke. I host the Drunken Debates. It's been around for a little while. Took a break for about a year, but we brought it back. We encourage great debate, discussion, and at the same time, we drink. So tonight, my beverage of choice, I'm doing a mead. This is a Sky River honey wine, semi-sweet mead, and it's roughly 10%. So that's awesome for me. We're going to get started with doing intros. What I need for my panelists to do is give me your name, what you do, where you lean, and what you're drinking tonight. Let's start with our top left panelist, critically thinking veteran who's making a return to the Drunken Debates. Go ahead, Crit.
Let's see. I am critically thinking veteran. I facilitate a community called the Infinity Acre Wood Discord server. I am the conservative main boss here in the entire Twitch politics community. I am the current Hippy Dippy champion, and I served 9 years on Ohio class submarines. I've got my Class A CDO license. I've driven all over the country. I'm an expert marksman, and I am a Christian American constitutional conservative. Very happy to be here.
All right, appreciate it. What are you drinking on tonight?
You know what? I've got a few beers and some of this foo-foo stuff the wife's got. I may drink it too, so we'll see.
There you go. All right, next we have BX Bullet making her return. Go ahead, BX.
What's up, guys? VX Bullet TV. I'm on Twitch and YouTube. Both VX Bullet TV. We do gun, self-defense topics, also sometimes politics. Also, we hunt predators online and try to expose them sometimes, just for funsies and the good of the world, I suppose. I'm a competitive shooter, private investigator, and I'm about to start doing bounty hunting stuff. So we'll have even more stuff to talk about on the stream. And I'm kind of like a center right-ish, libertarian-ish. I don't know. I'm politically homeless. I like to just like think about things as they come up and, you know, just make my mind up. And I try to make up my own mind and not play by like party rules. So yeah, that's me. Also, John, you're in the Elden Ring category. I just thought I'd let you know.
Oh shit, thank you. All right, what are you drinking on tonight, BX?
Oh, it's a Shiner strawberry blonde Shiner.
Nice.
And I also have an energy drink, you know, because you gotta Four Loko that shit, you know? That's just not legal anymore.
All right. Secondly, or next, we have his first time making an appearance on the show. We have Bryce live. Bryce, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Bryce Live. I'm a Canadian, but in terms of like political shit, I would say that I closely identify with like paternalistic conservative, but usually on the federal level, because the Conservative Party is a bit questionable these days, I do tend to like vote Liberal Party, but provincially, I voted for the Conservatives of Nova Scotia, which is where I'm from. I stream a lot of like random shit like politics, philosophy, economics. Usually, try to do a bit more economics, and yeah, just kind of talk about whatever shit comes around. I try to avoid a lot of the Twitch melodrama and that bullshit, but sometimes you get sucked into it and talking about it.
What are you drinking on tonight?
I guess a sour from a local brewery, and
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's tasty.
All right, first time on the show. Appreciate you coming here. Rose Risk, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Rose Wrist. I am a Swedish social democrat. My main stuff you can find on my YouTube channel, Rose Wrist. Uploads pretty much almost every day. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm drinking some Apple Bandit cider, which is big
Oh,
here.
damn, that was good.
But yeah,
That
it
was
is good.
good.
Really good. So yeah.
Okay. All right, making his return. He actually moved to America as of late. I think he decided to put roots down in New York, of all places to go. He's been on the show before. He's a very welcome guest, very intelligent man. We're welcoming back Dario. Dario, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you, John. I'll start out with the drink. Today I'm drinking a juice bomb from Sloop Brewery. I think it's a local brewery here in New York, if I'm not mistaken. I say it looking at my wife because she knows way more about beer than I do. Yeah, in terms of politics, I don't really like labels. I would say my politics most of the time are probably more progressive than the average American. But I'm jumping all over the political spectrum, and I have so since I started being politically active. So yeah, just looking to have some good conversations as it usually becomes on these panels. Yeah, excited for the panel to return.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. First time on the show, we've got PrimeCayes, or actually, yeah, it is your first time here, Prime. So Prime, thank you for being here tonight. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, my name is PrimeCayes, spelled as you see on the screen there, right? The twitch.tv/PrimeCayes. Come check us out. We're also on YouTube, so check us out there as well. I'm a far left socialist, the one that your conservative mother warned you about. I am, yeah, I guess that's it. I don't know, there's nothing else.
Where can they find you at as far as socials?
Oh, I said twitch.tv/PrimeCayes. Yeah, just like it's spelled right there.
What are you drinking on tonight?
I'm a non-drinker, so water.
Okay, fair enough. And then last but most certainly not least, first time on the show, we have Because Race Car. Race Car, go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Because Race Car. I do a variety of different types of streaming on Twitch, spelled Because Race Car right here. And not like how it's on my shirt. That's the wrong spelling. But I'm currently doing a lot with a video game called Planet Coaster, where I'm making a theme park themed around dick jokes and inappropriate humor. Politically, I'm kind of constitutionalist. I'll just come out and say it that way. I supported or fought and defended that document for 10 years of my life as a patriot, launching station crew member. So big props to those guys that shot down those two scuds this past January for the first time since Desert Storm. That's a pretty cool thing about those guys. And yeah.
What are you drinking on tonight?
I've got a mixture of Jim Beam apple and Sprite in a lovely tankard that I got from somebody that he might have actually, I think he signed the handle there too. So
big thank you for supporting us. All right, panelists, again, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate you being here. To the Twitch audience, my Twitch chat specifically, we're streaming live right now. I'm asking you to please keep it respectful. We don't need insults in the chat. You can disagree. If you want to attack something, attack the ideology. Don't attack the individual. And that's why we call it Drunken Debate. So let's keep this in, keep it in check. All right, the way this is going to work, panelists, for the new people that have never been here before, the way it's going to work is I'm going to introduce the topic. Once the topic's been introduced, you're going to have roughly 1 minute to give your stance on said topic. Once everyone has went around the horn, we're going to go into open floor debate. The way that's going to work is normally if you want to say something, just raise your hand. I'll call on you, and we can go from there. If somebody's talking mid-sentence, raise your hand. I'll call on you once they're finished. Normally in round tables, and then moving forward when we do outro, if I raise my hand, you've got about 10 seconds left. I don't want to intro or interrupt you and say, hey, you have 10 seconds. Just when you see me do it like that, you got 10 seconds to wrap it up. And when we finish the topic, we do closing statements. Actually, I'll make it 2 minutes. We'll do 2 minute intro, 2 minute outro. On the outro, when you're giving your final words on the topic discussed, no one-shotting at anybody on the panel. Don't say anybody by name. Just simply speak your piece and then let it go, because I don't like seeing people that are giving their outro take a shot at somebody and then they can't respond. So let's keep this thing fair. Are there any questions? All right. Let's get this thing started. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. First topic tonight. Here we go. Ukraine appears to be holding Russia at bay with increasing pressure on Biden to agree to enforce a no-fly zone. MSM outlets such as CNN and Fox and the rest of them are also trying to push for more American interventionism. The first question we have of round one. Do you think Biden will push for the no-fly zone? Right now he says he won't, but do you think that will change in the future? That's the first question. And we're going to start with PrimeCayes. Sir, you have 1 minute on the clock. And before I get started, none of the panelists were told what the topics were prior to us starting. So no one has any idea what the topics are. That's the premise behind Drunken Debates. No one gets a heads up start. So PrimeCayes, sir, you have 1 minute for your intro statement. Go ahead.
So, will Biden push for the no-fly zone? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Making sure. Okay. I doubt it. I doubt that he would go that far. It seems that Joe Biden is taking a more cautious route, and I can't necessarily blame him for that. But to impose a no-fly zone, which people seem to don't understand, is that this is like it's not something you can just say, like call it like in tag or something, you know, like I call it, right, or something like that. You have to impose it, and if someone breaks it, you gotta confront them. So American aircraft shooting down Russian aircraft does not seem very likely now. There could be a circumstance in the future that might call for it, but I just don't see at this moment. It makes more sense just to be supporting Ukraine by giving them weapons rather than actively taking a stance, putting American military in that theater.
Okay. Because race car, you've got 1 minute, sir. Go ahead.
All right, so Biden is leaning towards not enforcing a no-fly zone. I agree with that, but Biden has lied in the past, so whether or not he actually sticks to his word is one thing. But, you know, my biggest thing is as minimal American intervention as possible, even like down to like the monetary and any other kind of logistical support.
Okay. You still have 30 seconds remaining. Are you done?
Yeah, I yield the rest of my time.
Okay.
I'm short and sweet.
Roger that. Dario, over to you, sir. Go ahead.
I'm not muted. Yep. No. So in terms of what it seems to be that Joe Biden would be doing, I think right now, I don't think he's going to be pushing for it. I don't think there's any indication that he would be. If he was, I think he would have already done so when Zelensky basically requested it and said, like, this is what we need, or else we're going to basically be fucked. In terms of what I think should be done, I think it should definitely be on the table. I think if and when Ukraine starts losing and Putin starts threatening even more and more like harsh military actions, I think definitely America and NATO should be doing whatever they could to defend Ukraine and its people.
All right. Bryce, or I'm sorry, Rose Wrist, down to you. Go ahead. You've got 1 minute.
I think Biden's handling of the Ukraine situation has been like pretty much almost spotless, almost flawless when it comes to what he's done here. I think he's done everything short of putting the world at a significant risk for a world war with nuclear armaments. And I hope he keeps it that way. I hope he doesn't choose to enforce a no-fly zone, because doing so would incur a risk of American and Russian troops engaging in warfare, thus causing a war. And when both sides have nuclear weapons, that's a very, very risky thing to do. However, we cannot allow Russia to keep doing the things that they're doing, to go around and bullying neighboring countries. And as such, I think it is on the onus of the international community and the United States as a whole to do as much as they can, short of putting the world at a significant risk of nuclear war, in order to do so. So things like sanctions and those type of things, 100% in favor. Biden has been handling this really well so far. I hope he doesn't go back on his promise to not have a no-fly zone.
Okay. We're going to push it over to Bryce live. Sir, you've got 1 minute. Go ahead.
All right, thanks. I think it's extremely unlikely unless there's some particular event that takes place that triggers the conflict between the West and Russia. So something else outside of the no-fly zone needs to take place. I don't think a no-fly zone itself is a good move because that feeds into Putin's probable plans with how he would react and his overall like strategy. So I don't think that it's a good idea, and I don't think that we will do it. I think that the only time that we might do it is if it's in response to something else that is taking place, like the assassination of Zelensky or something really extreme, especially when we look back to like the world wars. We need some kind of significant historical event to happen that puts Russia on the bad guy, I guess, framing to make it pitchable at home and just like a legitimate kind of not necessarily moral, but like political and like a socially digestible idea. So I don't think that I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's a very good idea.
Over to BX. BX, got 1 minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel this. I just parrot kind of what because race car said is that, I agree that. I mean, he says he's not going to do a no-fly zone, and doing so would be really, really bad for the U.S. and would, antagonize the situation. But I also don't trust anything that comes out of his mouth because he just lies constantly. Sort of like, he lied to us when he was talking about how he would never do a federal mask mandate and blah, blah, blah. And then a few months later, polls showed that he'd be, more popular if he did that. So I think that it could definitely change in the future, but I really hope that we stay out of it.
Okay. We're going to push it over to critically thinking vet. Go ahead, sir.
The question whether or not Biden will. I think that Biden will do whatever he thinks is politically advantageous for the party, right? I don't see him as an individual thinker. I see him as a puppet, frankly, right? I think that Kamala Harris going over to Ukraine and not understanding the situation at all that's happening in that region did everything to encourage, right, the situation to get to where it is now. So as far as the Biden administration being able to handle something as complex and sensitive, right, as foreign the policy that we find ourselves in today, I think that they definitely will, when they think that it's advantageous for them to do so, get us even more involved in this situation. That's what I see happening.
Okay. That concludes 1 minute rounds. Now it's open for open debate, but I don't think anybody's really disagreed. Is there anything else anybody has to say?
I think everybody probably disagrees with me.
I think
there are quite a few disagreements, right?
Yeah.
I think Dario was in favor of a no-fly zone because Race Car and Big Split were against any forms of sanctions or anything. So I think there's quite a few places to go with this.
All right, go ahead and get it started then. I was talking about specifically the no-fly zone, but if you want to veer into other categories of the Ukraine issue, go right ahead.
No, I think.
Well, I think another big thing is like the whole like Biden lie thing, right? Like I think that's something you can really lean into, this kind of conservative fetish with like blaming Biden, or it's just this weird like American like divide where you guys make everything about my party versus your party, like this chauvinism, and it just seems really silly and like kind of like short-sighted in terms of actually evaluating
better
the
if we said the Biden
geopolitical.
administration, because we know that dude ain't making any decisions. He can't even wipe his own ass. So
Yeah, why don't you just say the American government? Like,
I feel like
this
idea about.
All right, we're gonna go ahead into raising the hands. Raise the hand, and I'll call on you. We'll go. All right, Prime, go ahead.
Yeah.
Then we'll go to Crit. Then we go to Bryce.
Okay, so anyone who watches my channel is very much aware that I'm no fan of Biden. I criticize this man constantly, but I don't see him making this decision, this foreign policy decision, strictly on the basis of like what will help the Democratic Party. I don't see. I mean, not that like there are many considerations that a politician takes in when they do anything, true, but I don't see him as simply doing this as like, well, what will help me in the polls, right? Like I think he understands the sensitivity of the situation, and I also, something that we haven't talked about, but I'm sure we'll jump into later on, the sanctions, right? Like people are talking about doing this like no-fly zone, taking more aggressive military actions, but I think the sanctions should have been putting a lot of pressure. I don't think we necessarily have to take more aggressive military action, at least at this point in time, because the sanctions have been doing their work. I think they've been pushing Russia to the table. So
I'm just curious about the lie about. Oh, sorry, Hans.
We got to go to Crit, then we'll go to Bryce, then we'll go to you, Rose. Crit to you, then Bryce, Rose, then Dario.
Yeah, so
Gotcha,
Bryce, right? Like it is silly. We could go into the history of how the laws ended the way they are, and the way that the voting system actually controls it to two parties, right? And how it's even hard for a third party to break out. We could go into all that, right? But I feel like that it's much better to be pointing out that since 1949 and the creation of NATO, right? Now, while NATO has not had any hostile actions, it does continue, right, to be what in fact it is a standing army, right? And our founders told us that standing armies are dangerous to liberty. So whenever you've got an entangling alliance, again, something else that they warned us about, by way of NATO, continuing to expand the standings of this army, right? And then another nation seeing it as a threat, that is a perspective that we would be sensitive to if it was happening to us. But the fact that it's Russia and their economy collapsed and they didn't have any way to continue pushing back against that in 1989, what we've seen is a continuing expansion of NATO, right? Because it's good to make money, right? So because of greed, we end up where we are now. And now people are having to really take a look at, like, how is this piper going to get paid?
All right, let's push down to Bryce, then to Rose, then to Dario, and then to Race Car. Go ahead, Bryce.
Okay, there are a whole bunch of things that I think are worth talking about. I think, to respond to CTV, I think it's really easy to get mired down in like the historical stuff about like NATO expansion, maybe like expanding like economic interests and like involvement. But like a really key thing to remember is that we've tried to do things like bring Russia to the table. We have bent over backwards, like under multiple administrations to try to bring Russia into the fold and be like, yo, like you can play with us. Like they called it like the NATO Russia Council or Alliance or something. So they've put all kinds of effort into like including Russia, and that hasn't worked. And I think it's really important to point out that just generally speaking, in the U.S. you have like Mark Milley was under Trump, right? He's still under Biden. So there are a lot of like people. So this trend to me, I just want to make sure that as a panel, like as an hour-long discussion, we avoid any like pitfalls of like falling into this debate about like Democrats versus Republicans, and we keep it on the more like larger global stage and mindful of like the actual like Ukraine Russian like situation, especially like no-fly zone, like the sanctions, whatever, and that's it.
Okay, good. So we can agree. That's why I didn't mention the party politics, and I moved on from that, right? So understanding on the world stage, right, that Russia got its teeth kicked in whenever the wall fell down, right? So when they got their teeth kicked in, everybody else just want to be like, oh, yeah, it's okay, bro. Except Russia, right, is not like your little bro. Russia is a full-on fucking nation that has a lot of pride in itself, right? And whenever you knock a big guy down, you've got to give him some time to be able to chill and let him come back around to you after you kick his fucking teeth in. If you start trying to come, as soon as you start trying to come, immediately, right, and be like, yo, it's fine, everything's fine, they're going to be like, no, right? So because you didn't allow the time there for them to be able to come back to the table without also having the standing army there constantly being a potential threat, and then continuing to expand the territories in which that alliance was in, that's when you start to see like, you're coming back at me again, bro. I've had enough of this shit, and now we are where we are.
All right, let's push down to Rose real quick. Hold on, Rose, go ahead.
Okay, I want to go over a few things. First of all, apparently Biden allegedly lied about the mask mandate. I would like to know when this was, because I just did some cursory Googling, and it seems as of August, so before the election, he said that he wanted to implement a mask mandate nationwide. So I don't know when exactly he went back on a promise there. I would be interested to know that. Then on to the Ukraine stuff and NATO expanding. When it comes to standing armies and stuff like that, and CTV saying that Russia needed time to be able to chill. We gave them time to chill, but the only issue is Russia didn't fucking chill, right? Russia went into the eastern of Europe. They went and intervened in a bunch of countries. And, you talk about these things about, okay, sure, the US benefits from, more like NATO presence everywhere. Yeah, sure. But do you think Romania and Poland care that that the US gets some more influence if they're going to be protected from an incredibly jingoistic and aggressive, military force that is to their east, that is Russia? We gave them time to chill, and it is Russia that decided to take the initiative and decided to mess with the sovereignty of Eastern European countries. Most recent example of that being Ukraine, and NATO expanding there. NATO being one of the only things that have actually been shown to be able to effectively dissuade Russia from invading and fucking with your country. I don't see anything wrong at all with NATO going in there, and NATO or countries joining NATO voluntarily to be protected from Russia. Other alternatives have been tried, more peaceful arrangements. So, for example, the Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine decided to do nuclear deproliferation in an exchange where Russia and the US and a bunch of other parties agreed to maintain the borders of Ukraine and not fuck with them. Guess what? Russia doesn't care. Russia invaded anyway. They have tried everything. They've tried treaties. They've tried giving Russia space. It doesn't matter. Russia will invade, and they will fuck with countries to their west unless NATO is there to protect them. And if those countries need NATO protection, then goddamn, they should have NATO protection.
Yeah, but y'all
hold on. Wait. Crit, hold on. Over to Dario. Dario, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with what Rose was said. In terms of just defending the own point that I gave, in terms of like we should be prepared to use a no-fly zone, is that I think that there comes a point where you need to take a stand, right? If you're worried, your chief worry is like World War III, which is a legitimate worry, right? Like everybody should be fucking worried about nuclear war, for sure, right? But the issue is that that doesn't really work in terms of like what people generally support currently, right? So like Putin has been on the record saying that the sanctions currently are so severe, and they're very severe, that they are tantamount to a war declaration from the West at like NATO and like the allied forces, right? And he is prepared to meet that, like if it becomes bad enough, right? He's also said that if the Ukrainian resistance keeps going as it is right now, he is prepared to use nuclear weapons, like to stop it, right? He has said that, right? But I don't see people here advocating for let's lift the sanctions, let's just leave it alone, let's just give Putin everything he wants, right? Because there is some degree of things we do not want to allow Putin to do, right? And I'm just saying, the only thing that I'm saying is I think it is unacceptable for a nuclear power to set that precedent that they should be able to bully whoever they want, and they can always do whatever the fuck they want if they just threaten to use nukes, right? And then we have to disengage. I think that's unacceptable. That's a non-starter, and I think even the risk of nuclear war is probably better than that.
Because Racer, and then we'll go to Bryce.
The risk of nuclear war is ultimately that is the penultimate. When it comes down to this,
Gotcha,
what
Rose.
this complex is coming down to, like, you absolutely cannot risk that,
Gotcha, Brian.
and just absolutely not. We already know that if NATO gets involved with this, that yes, nukes will be dropped. If Ukraine joins NATO, nukes will be dropped. This has
Dario.
like a lose-lose situation all over it for the U.S. So, like I said, I'm not for Americans being involved in this whatsoever. I do know that there is already Patriot batteries deployed to Poland, but I don't believe that they are there to defend the Ukrainian airspace. I believe that they are there to protect Poland, another ally of ours. And as far as even fulfilling our NATO obligations, as far as like sending the 12,000 troops that we've sent over there, I don't necessarily agree with it, even though that's kind of like our obligation. Both sides of this war between the Ukraine and Russia, they're both very dirty players. They're both very corrupt, and we really don't need to be getting involved in it.
All right, we're gonna push down to Bryce.
Respond?
Dario, one response. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I understand what you're saying, because race car, and I agree, right? It is pretty much like the penultimate thing to do. But what I'm saying is that I think everybody here has a line, right? And I'm just asking people to be honest where their line is, right? So like Putin can literally go now and say, okay, I'm gonna take Ukraine, then I'm gonna take Kazakhstan, then I'm gonna take like all the surrounding countries that aren't a part of NATO, and then maybe some people would say, listen, if that's the only thing we can do, and then go to war, then let's let him have those countries, right? Then he can say, now I want all of the NATO countries to reject Ukrainian refugees, or else I'm going to do a nuclear war. I want every single Ukrainian to be out of those Western countries. Would you be prepared to say, okay, well, I guess we can't take Ukrainian refugees anywhere. Like, let's eject them from Poland. What if he then goes, okay, I'm going to invade Poland? What then, right? You can say, oh, it's a NATO country. Well, yeah, but would you rather defend Poland or basically say, okay, let's go to nuclear war? Right? It's a lose-lose no matter what, right? All I'm asking is like, where's the line? And we should be prepared for the worst, because I don't think Putin's playing games.
All right, let's push down to Bryce, then Rose, then Prime. Crit, did you want to add?
Well, I just think it's funny.
No, I
that
meant
you-
it's in the order. I didn't see you put your hand up.
Oh yeah, I definitely got some things to say to
Okay.
these Europeans.
Okay. Bryce, Rose, then Prime, then Crit. Bryce, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, so a couple of things I want to talk about. Firstly, I think it's important to point out that we don't have a guarantee that World War III would be nuclear. Obviously, it would be pretty significant, like pretty likely. There's a significant probability of it being nuclear, but World War III isn't necessarily going to be nuclear if it does happen, which obviously, like, so I think it's just good to like add as much information and nuance to these kind of conversations as possible. Something that I think Dario said is worth responding to. I don't know that our individual takes as panelists really matter that much, because realistically the line is going to be something extreme, like the assassination of Zelensky, I'm using that because of the example of like the previous world wars, like the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. So clearly, like something extreme needs to be taking place for us to justify something like a no-fly zone, where this is a direct conflict with Russia. So I think that's where the line is. Like you need something that the West is like, oh shit, like okay, this is kind of a big deal. Like we can't fuck around. Like we got to take this seriously, and then we got to participate in this because it also has to be something that can be packaged for the domestic audience and really like sell it to us, right? Like if we're getting involved on like a global war, this is something that we as citizens need to agree and like support. I think to some of the other points, like the other thing that I do agree with is that
I got your race car.
Rose is 100% right. We've done a metric fuck ton to try to include Russia, and they weren't satisfied. Putin's ambitions and interests transcend our efforts to try to include them in our economic bloc and include them like geopolitically and include them. We created something like we didn't just say like, oh yeah, you can join NATO. We created the NATO Russia Joint Permanent Council where they gave them like veto votes in NATO. Then they gave them like special status like outside of NATO as like a big brother to all of NATO. Like we've done so much shit to try to include Russia that I think it's obvious that like we've tried a lot. Granted, the final thing that I'll say on this is that I don't think that on basically outside of like an extreme situation is a no-fly zone a good idea at all.
Over to Rose.
Is it possible to throw me in after CTV?
Absolutely. Prime. Oh, you're good. Prime, go ahead.
Yeah. So Bryce beat me to it there, in saying that this doesn't automatically mean nuclear war. So if NATO troops cross like the Ukrainian border, it doesn't mean that Putin will immediately start spamming the nuke button, right? Like that. Like those two things are very different. So and I got to double down on what Dario said, and that Putin can just keep escalating his demands if we don't have some sort of response, right? Some sort of response that says like, okay, this far and no farther. He cannot simply throw his weight around, and then he can't be the one who decides our responses, right? It's something, obviously, what your enemy will do factors into what you will do, but he doesn't get to like come into a NATO meeting and just say, hey, you know what? Yeah, nukes for everyone. Nukes for everyone if you cross me. And so you keep that in mind. I think that it's easy to realize for Americans especially, or Westerners, to feel that Russia is some sort of like a dictatorship in which there is no domestic concerns, right? That Putin has nothing that he needs to worry about back home, right? Like first of all, he wants a country that's not irradiated, right? So he doesn't want to get nuked himself. And he has people that though he may not answer to, that do support him, like critical infrastructure, like to his regime. And so that falls away, right? Like it's not impossible this guy gets dislodged, right? So he has to keep these things in mind. And I think it's just so easy to think that this is just the one man's doing, right? And nothing else ever factors in. So yeah.
All right, we're gonna kick it over to, I think it was Crit, and then we'll go to Race Car. Crit, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it's funny that the Europeans now are all of a sudden worried about Russia when historically they've been doing nothing but buddying up to Russia, right? Getting oil, natural gas, etc. The things that keep your fucking lights on, right? Well, all at the same time, right? Try to push this Green Deal, right? Germany doesn't have any reactors, or getting rid of the reactors, etc., etc. Like now we've got this concern over here in Ukraine. Now we've got to reshape the whole thing. This right here is in fact an opportunity. Right? It's an opportunity for Europe to get its shit together instead of being reliant on the United States. That's what needs to happen. The United States does not need to be involved in NATO, and it definitely does not need to be involved in the affairs of Europe. Europe needs to get its shit together so that it's not on the backs of American taxpayers to be paying for defense on a continent that's not even ours, right? If we wanted...
Gotcha, Bryce.
If we wanted Europe to be a part of the United States, then what would need to happen is the European nations would need to start applying for statehood. Otherwise, Europe can figure out its own fucking problems.
All right, over to Race Car, then we got Dario, then we got Rose. Oh, Rose, you want to do? Okay, Rose, go ahead. And then we'll go to Race Car, then Dario.
I just want to point out the beautiful shift in arguments from CTV. So I'm going before from saying that we wouldn't give Russia time to chill because we were always aggressing on them to now saying that, well, Europe was just butting up with them all along. We have kind of like a double narrative there that we shift between depending on what we want to do. Furthermore, there's like an all of a sudden now we're against Russia. Can tell you this, you are completely unfamiliar with contemporary or, more historical information about Eastern Russia. There's a widely different political interest and a different history for Eastern Russia in relation to Eastern Europe in relation to Russia and Western Europe in relation to Russia, but you seem to be just focusing on Western Europe here, so there's something that's missing there. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that complete shift in argument there. Then I want to address a bit about what Daria said about the escalation there in regards to war and stuff like that. Sure, there is definitely escalation and not lines to be drawn, but I do think there's a massive significant difference between direct confrontation between military forces and what we've done, at this point out. And I think one of those major differences are precedent. So you brought up the example of Putin declares sanctions, I think sanctions is a declaration of war. Or what if he says we can't take refugees? Well, the difference there is that we have taken refugees, no nuclear war. We have given Ukraine support, no nuclear war. We have put sanctions on Russia, no nuclear war. We have had NATO nations rise up on Russian borders, no nuclear war. However, direct conflict, we have no idea what that precedent is going to look like. And I don't want to take that risk. I don't want to risk the lives of billions of people on this planet in order to try to see, okay, well, how far can we push this? Let's just go from what we have now. We have right now demonstrated that, hey, Russia is not willing to do nukes for these things. So, regardless of what they say, they haven't demonstrated this precedent. And if they change that, we need to deal with the situation as it unfolds. But we don't need to further escalate the pretty significant difference between, broader political action towards direct military confrontation. I think that's a pretty big thing there. And I just want to add that.
Yeah, so
Rose,
Poland...
hold on. Rose, where do you currently live?
I currently live in Amsterdam.
Okay,
and I
so
am
you're not
half
in
Swedish
okay.
and half Romanian. And, yeah.
Okay, just curious. All right, we're going to push it over to Race Car, down to Dario, and then Bryce, you had your hand up, and then over to Cret.
It's CTV. Look, I got to say this. It's CTV, John. Right?
CTV.
I like Crit. Crit has a...
Car.
All right, so something that hasn't been brought up that is probably even way scarier than the nuclear war, so I'm kind of gonna debunk something that I previously said about nuclear war being the penultimate. The biolabs in Ukraine. What happens when Russia accomplishes or acquires those? Because we already know that the U.S. has been funding crap going in there, and thank God there's no wet markets in Ukraine.
All right, the question was open. We're going to go ahead and push down to Dario, then to Prime, then to Bryce. Dario, go ahead.
So first to CTV and then to Rose. So first off, CTV, these Europeans, I am American. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, I am a proud New Yorker as of this moment.
Do you not think there's any Europeans in the audience?
No, but I assumed you said these Europeans.
And since Rose versus in Europe.
Okay.
No, in Europe, I am European.
Just wanted to make that clear. Okay, proud American. Okay. In terms of it being Europe's problem, I think generally a bigger, stronger Russia, which just throws around its weight willy-nilly, is very much America's problem and has been so for like the past 100 years. I think right now the U.S. and Russia are engaged in like proxy wars all over the world. So like any victory for Russia is a defeat for the United States, and not just like as a part of NATO, but just like the U.S. itself. In terms of like precedent and sort of your response to me, Rose Wrist, I think you said there's a difference, right? There's a difference between these things and like direct confrontation. Says who? Right? Says you. I agree, right? But that doesn't really matter. Like at this point, we have to ask, what does Putin think, right? And if we have credible evidence from like the Pentagon wrote that like they have credible evidence that Putin considers this like worth possibly going to nuclear war about. Like if Ukraine keeps resisting, like he is very credibly considering like nuclear weapons, right? What is the precedent you want to set there? Like what is the U.S. response? Is the U.S. response to be like, okay, we take it back, please. We now advocate for Ukraine to give it all up. Like you cannot fight anymore, or we will sanction you, or you should give up to Russia because we're afraid that the nukes are gonna come into a NATO country or the U.S. Like that's like those are the options that I see. Right, if you want to be consistent, sure.
Which is why being involved in the Entangling Alliance was a problem to begin with. So how do we move on from here?
All right, hold on, real quick, guys. Hold on. We got to go to Prime, then Bryce, and we'll bring it back around. I know Rose had... Yeah, go ahead.
So just to finish the sentence, right? So if you
Yeah.
want to talk specifically precedent, right? So is the precedent that you want to set that Russia can basically invade any non-NATO country as much as it wants, and we will not attack, we will not help? Is because that I don't think that's acceptable.
Can I comment on that specifically? Because I think that was a question directly aimed at me.
Rose, go ahead. Prime, is that all
Yeah.
right with you? All right, Rose, go ahead.
I'll keep it short. So I don't like that the framing is like, okay, either we go to nuclear war or we just sit back and not do anything. We're doing literally everything that is possible besides direct military confrontation. So I don't like this framing of like, okay, well, we're kind of not doing anything. It's very important to notice what we are doing, and we're doing a fuckload, okay? That's number one. And then number two, unfortunately, hey, we do need to look at the reality. I think the best thing to do at this point in time is like do everything we can, throw everything at the wall as possible besides direct military confrontation, get as many countries into NATO as possible. But unfortunately, I don't think it is worth risking, like significant escalation in nuclear capabilities in regards to what we've seen before in terms of precedent and what's accepted or not in order to do this. I think we're already doing everything we can besides things that are very significant upsteps in the escalation.
Like it isn't stopping. It isn't stopping. And Zelensky, the Ukrainian people are asking to do these things which they know will help. And we're basically saying, we will not do that. You're on your own. If Russia takes you, it is how it is. We'll keep the sanctions, but we'll let Russia take you. I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think that's an acceptable precedent that a nuclear power can just take like another sovereign country and we will do fuck all, even if they are like, yeah.
Prime, we got to go down to you, then to Bryce, then to Race Car. Or I'm sorry, it was Prime, Bryce, and then CRT. Or jam it. Critically think of Veteran. Jesus Christ. Prime, go ahead.
Okay, something that's been annoying me, I just gotta say it. Penultimate means second to last, right? It's not above ultimate, it's like below ultimate. So you're using it wrong. I just gotta get that out there. All right, anyway. So...
Well, then I was correct in using it the way that I said, because...
So what's above nuclear war? You said nuclear war is penultimate.
Biological. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right.
Kind of got a little bit of a taste of it with COVID. Imagine what happens when some real biological weapons get out there.
Okay. So moving on, I think that what we're butting up against is what does it mean for America to be the hegemon, right? Like if America wants to be top dog, to be a world police, right? To be the economic power and military power, then what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that people that are outside of a formal alliance, right, that to set a precedence against another rival that you invade against them do we actually want to set that precedent, right? I'm not sure. I'm like posing questions here because I'm actually not sure what the answers to any of these things are. Do we want to do that? If that's the case, okay, sure. But how far does that extend, right? So is it only the countries that Russia invades, right? Because, I mean, there are other conflicts that are going on that we actually don't really give a shit about, right? There are plenty of other conflicts that are raging, and the U.S. doesn't care. Like ethnic cleansing that's happening in the U.S. doesn't really give a shit. So is that, I guess, the dividing line that we use to send troops? Is that Russia in particular is the one that does it? China in particular, if they're going against Taiwan? No, Taiwan at least we don't have a promise. Actually, we don't even have a promise that we'll defend those guys. But the point is that what is this dividing line? And what was everything that we've been discussing? So it's Ukraine's a non-NATO nation, right? It wanted to join, and it looks like it's probably not going to, right? Russia has made its point, but
to what you just said, currently, yeah, Ukraine denied the fact they want to join NATO. They just came out with that like a few days ago. They said we don't want to join. Yeah,
exactly, right. They've made their point. I think I don't know the best way, but a way is to let the sanctions work, right? Like let them put the hurt on the Russian economy as they're doing right now. We are doing quite a lot, as Rose said, and wait it out a bit, right? I think we are seeing actual progress in terms of the talks between Russia and Ukraine. So I think this idea of a no-fly zone is actually quite premature. There may come a time, a circumstance where that's necessary, but I think it's just far too early.
All right, over to you, Bryce.
Okay. I think a really key thing. So you have to really. I think it's something we have to really concede is that Ukraine is probably going to lose, right? They're losing right now. They have lost a lot of ground. They're fighting, like, don't get me wrong, like, they're fighting tooth and nail. They're making Russia bleed both through, like, the loss of actual, like, hardware and soldiers for every, like, square kilometer. But at the same time, they're still losing. Like, they are going to lose. So I think the focus of, like, the US, NATO, and the West should be doing everything that we are doing right now. Like, we don't want to do no-fly zone. We don't want to do anything that involves, like, Poland more directly. We don't want to, like, continue, like, poking the bear, literally, like, Russia as being the bear, because they're gonna lose, right? So it's so much better if we just mitigate this humanitarian disaster. We support Ukraine as we've been supporting them, because Russia's the aggressor. So we, like, I think we're validated in giving them, like, arms, supplies, armor, like, medical help, and on the borders, like, giving a fuck ton of, like, humanitarian aid. But if we do anything else besides what we're doing right now, and even arguably even some of that is, like, excessive and a little over the top, because we have, like, the social fallout, right? Like, there's the social fallout of all these companies pulling out of Russia, all the kind of, like, crazy and weird, almost like racist treatment of Russians, and it's kind of like kind of excessive. It's kind of over the top. So I think what we just have to do is we have to actually be like, okay, we are actually doing a metric fuck ton of stuff, and to some extent there is a, like, a little glimmer of a good idea in CTV's earlier statement, in that we do have to, like, at some point leave Russia alone to kind of recover and, like, lick their wounds, because, like it or not, we can't completely bully them
Gotcha,
around
Rose.
and basically make them our bitch, right? We do have to let them, like, lick their wounds. They have to, because America has to worry about, like, China. They have to worry about the overextension of their military. So we don't want to put the whole entire world's security at risk just to, like, satisfy like helping in Ukraine.
All right, let's push it over to, I think it was CTV. Did you have something to respond to?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So we still haven't moved anywhere closer to understanding Russia through everything that got said, right? The reason why Russia continues to be the thing is because the way its infrastructure has been built over time. It's got roads that run all the way from, like, Moscow is your central hub over here, because it was developed a lot through the Soviet Union, and then it branches all the way out and runs all the way out to fucking Mongolia, right? So there's road systems that will naturally help Russia reform itself every time, no matter if you went in there and actually took everything the fuck over and then left. That's the same thing is going to happen over and over again. So, because of the buildup of this standing army by way of NATO, you know, it'd be one thing to where if there was an informal alliance where the European Union had its forces and then they start pushing back against the thing, right? And then if it got to a point where, hell, they'd have to actually come over here to the United States to do something against us. Or, like, I'd need, like, some real serious evidence of, say, concentration camps like we saw in Germany, right? Because those were discovered in 1942, and that was one of the things, especially after Pearl Harbor, right, that made us go, well, Germany declared war on us. Well, you know what? We've got evidence of this. Fuck it. Let's go, too. We're going to war on two fronts, baby, right? So, because we're in the situation now, and the Europeans have had no problem setting up economic trade between themselves and Russia, it places the United States in an entangling alliance as of, like, right now, whenever we're sitting here denying Russian oil from coming in, but the Europeans are like, well, we still kind of need it. Well, that's a European fucking problem, right? So that's why they're like, we're still going to do it, but we're supposed to not accept it over here, right? Because of moral outcry. And all the while, the Biden administration has not been approving drilling permits to be able to drill here at home. So, like, this administration, and I really am not sure if it's just this administration or, like, this party, or if it's all the way across the board, because you got, like, figures like Lindsey Graham and John McCain that have been going over to Ukraine and encouraging those people and telling them that Ukraine's fight is America's fight, right? Well, who the hell do they think they are to be signing up America's sons and daughters to go fight another European fucking war?
Rose,
I really
down to you.
respond. Oh, sorry.
Bryce, we'll give Rose it okay if Bryce responds, or do you want to go ahead?
He can go
Bryce,
first.
you have a response, then we'll go down to Rose. Then Prime, did you
Oh.
raise your hand? Or was it Dario?
No, I'm
All right,
good for now.
Bryce, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
All right. No, thanks. I'll try to make it really quick. So CTV, there are a couple things that you said that I really want to respond to. First, I think the whole understanding Russia. The problem with that is that Russia comes to us being like, we have a gripe with like NATO's expansion, and like we want to imagine like a new security corridor. We want to imagine a new Eastern Europe with like our security concerns being met. And like this is basically like the kind of like front speak. They're coming to you. They have like one arm behind their back with their like weapons or their real agenda like hidden behind their back, and they're saying like, yeah, here, look, this is our list of demands. Like this is what we want. This is what we need from you. And then meanwhile, they have something like completely different. So we have like we do our best to include Russia, because in 1997, I think, is when we really started, or in 1999, we stepped up those involvements. And even you conceded that there's a bunch of buddy with Europe and Russia, like some of these countries, like Germany. I think Germany is one of the main countries that has had significant like energy relations with Russia. So there's clearly like a significant amount of effort from Western European and to some extent like Eastern European countries to normalize relations with Russia. So if we want to understand, I think what your point is good. So what you said about your wanting to understand Russia is good, but you have to understand that we can't do it in the way that you're trying to frame it and present it and like even go about it, because we have really exceptional intelligence agencies that are telling us a fuck ton of stuff, that there's a lot more. And I think maybe Prime was the one that said it, like there's a huge complexity to the Russian administration as a whole. There's way more than just Putin. There's Lavrov, there's Shugay, there's like a good like half dozen other guys that are really fucking dangerous and really, really powerful, and they all have their own agendas.
Yeah, well, the problem is that our leaders, right, our elected representatives, they don't know what America's fucking plan is. Whenever you've got, I think it was Kamala Harris went over somewhere and they were having a meeting and they asked the Chinese what, y'all can do whatever y'all want to do, right? Instead of coming here and saying, this is what we need. That's the difference. They're more than happy to just obfuscate responsibility, right? And then just deal with whatever it is that those people decide. You have to come out onto the stage and tell everyone else, this is what the United States needs to happen, right? If you're supposed to be, and it seems like there's always a lot of conversation, especially from other nations in the world, about how America's the leader, right? And then here in the United States, we're like, okay, we're the leader, right? So then whenever we tell you this is what we need, and then everybody else is, well, we can't really do that, then fuck you.
Okay.
That's the way I look at it.
Hold on. We got to go down to Rose. Rose, go ahead. Then to Dario.
I can't believe that you need the European up here to tell you guys about the fucking American values, especially UTCTV. I see the American flag in the background, okay? America is meant to be a goddamn bastion for freedom. And what kind of bastion of freedom is that? There's on the poster, stand and kneel. There's like some American thing in between there, but that's okay. So America is meant to be a bastion of freedom, okay? What kind of bastion of freedom is just going to sit by idly and watch as atrocities are committed, as democracy is subverted, as sovereignty is taken and freedom is stripped? I don't know why I, as a European, have to remind you guys of this, but hey, I guess it's necessary. Furthermore, I want to develop a bit more about the relationship between Russia and Western Europe. While Western Europe was initially a bit, hesitant about doing some of the sanctions that America was pushing for, there has been halting some significant things of note. Are the Nord Stream 2, which was halted because of the sanctions. But at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with engaging economically with Russia. But when Russia does some fucked up shit, we're going to sanction them and we're going to cut off those, kind of communications or those types of relationships there. I want to talk a bit about the precedent that Dario and Prime is talking about here.
Hold on. I didn't finish.
So I'm going to talk about that a bit as well, about the precedent. And, it sucks, but unfortunately, I think that is a precedent, or that is something that we need to tolerate, how America and NATO can't just step in there and risk entire nuclear war that's going to potentially risk the lives of millions and billions of people all around the planet. However, I will provide 2 extra points of analysis to why this, precedent, as you call it, will not be as bad as you guys expect it to be. So number 1, willingness to join NATO is, as high as it's ever been. Support for NATO in a bunch of different countries, but we will likely see after this conflict and during this conflict, I mean, if you just look at Sweden or Finland, is a lot more countries going to want to join NATO. The ability for Russia to expand is going to be reduced because of things like this. So it's not just going to be like, everything's going to be the same afterwards, but now Russia has the president to do whatever they want. That's number 1. Point number 2 is that there is still a lot to do while this war is still going on, but also after the war, seeing how the international community reacts to Russia after the war, seeing how it might punish Russia, seeing how it might engage in treaties or things in order to limit its effectiveness or limit its capability of doing things like this in the future through the punishments that they're going to get for what they fucking did to Ukraine, is also going to put a significant kind of like stick in the wheel for them to be able to take advantage of this precedent, so as you call it. So I don't think this precedent will be as bad as you guys say, but unfortunately, hey, it still must be there. I'm not willing to risk nuclear war in order to protect these countries. It fucking sucks. We should do everything else we can except for that significant increase.
It's a lie, though. That's a fucking lie.
What's a lie? Tell me,
That's
CDV.
a lie. Because when
What's a lie?
Poland offered up those fucking MiGs, they wanted to fly them to Ramstein Air Force Base for the United States to take control of them before they got sent back to the fucking Ukraine. So you tell me how much sense it makes whenever you've got a NATO nation that wants to support the war effort, but they wanted to go through the United States and fly those planes motherfucking west before flying them back over Poland and then east into fucking Ukraine. You want to risk nuclear war because you want to involve the United States. If the United States wasn't involved, there wouldn't be a risk of nuclear fucking war, because the only two nations over there that got nukes right now that I'm aware of, right, specifically, at least on submarines, is the fucking UK and France. That's it. So you need the United States. Without the United States,
hold on.
you got
Calm
nothing.
down. Calm down real quick. Calm down. I just want to throw something in here real quick, and then we're going to go over to Dario. I know you have your hand up here. I just want to respond to Rose real quick. Rose, I see your point there in regards to the bastion of freedom, but I think that applies strictly to America, because if we want to apply that to the entire world, then America becomes the world police. And the issue that I have with the point that you just made, and I do apologize to my panelists, I am a moderator, but sometimes I like to interject my opinion on there just to give a little bit more insight. The issue that I think that you're not really understanding, or I don't mean to insult you like that, not that you don't understand, but my perspective is that what about Tibet? What about China's genocide? Where does the line get drawn, as we've said several times? Because the issue that I keep running into is America's just got done fighting a 20-year war that a majority of us didn't want to get involved in after the fact. And then secondly, when we talk about NATO, who's the ones doing the heavy lifting in NATO? And that's not a shot at the other European countries that are involved in that. America does, economically and manpower, the majority of the heavy lifting when it is called upon. And then you talk about what's the line in the sand. America didn't get involved in World War II until damn near we got hit in Pearl Harbor. It pulled us in. So I can't necessarily sit there and agree with you that America should say, like, we're going to enforce democracy across the world, because we tried to do that in the Middle East. Alexander the Great couldn't even do it. I just think that this is one of those things that America should just sit back. I'm sorry, I shouldn't go any further on it, but I just wanted to counter that, to give you some food for thought on that. And if you want to respond, by all means, go ahead, and then we'll shift to Dario. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I
apologize, Dario.
So when you say things like what about China and stuff like that, sure, but you need to do a holistic analysis of these things. So for instance, when it comes to stuff like Ukraine, there are really simple things that US can do that it is doing, like things like the sanctions and all these things that are very effective in preventing the Russian war effort there. And I think those things can be done. When it comes to China thing, I don't know if you're imagining maybe like a US invasion there. I would say that's a greater threat to the values that the United States seems to hold to, like world peace and stuff like that. Therefore, it shouldn't be done. So I think if you picture like a holistic analysis, then it doesn't mean that, okay, well, whenever there's a violation, America should just go guns ablaze and go in there and do whatever thing. If you do a holistic analysis, you can see, well, in these places, we can take action that we think is going to holistically benefit the world more. And in some cases, it's very difficult to do so. So therefore, you shouldn't do so. I don't think.
What right does America have to do that? We don't have that right. That's nobody's right.
What do you mean right? What do you mean? Do you mean like a legal right? Do you mean a moral right? Do you mean a
moral obligation? Like I feel it's kind of, I don't know. It just feels like it's just too much for any other country out there to say you have to do according to our value. You have to live according to our values. And again, I am not for genocide. I'm not condoning that. But again, where does the line in the sand get drawn? We talk about Africa. We talk about China. We talk about these other countries over there. This is a very slippery slope, and I get your approach there. But it's just, again, it's one of those things of, like, what's the deal? Like, what is the trigger here?
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be done on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, it's very difficult to do like a general rule with all the examples you talk about. But even you seem to agree that to some extent, the U.S. should play some role on the international scene and do what it can, right? I assume.
Yes.
Complete. Yeah. So, I mean, we have both different points where we're willing to intervene to some extent. So I think the slippery slope thing, if anything, it kind of just applies to both of us, because I don't think there's any significant difference. It's just I'm willing to draw the line a little bit further than you are. But once again, it's case-by-case basis. It's very complex, although when it comes to the moral thing, I would say that freedom isn't like any less worth if it's outside of the borders of the U.S. So I think that there's still a moral obligation for U.S. then to stand up for the rights it seeks to uphold and for the rights that we see as being morally valuable and stuff like that. Then I just want to add a little thing about when you talked about the U.S. basically taking the entire responsibility of the NATO thing and stuff like that, and how Europe isn't taking their weight. This has been an issue, absolutely, and I think Europe is starting to recognize it more. So, for instance, Germany had like a historic, increase in military and military funding and spending following everything that's going on right now with NATO and all of that. So it seems like that's going to balance out a little bit more. There's also a lot of talks about having an EU army as well, which is undoubtedly going to increase that. So I see what you're pointing out there, and a lot of countries in Europe are recognizing that and taking action on the basis of that as well. So I just want to point that out.
Dario, over to you, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to be responding to CTV, then Rose, then you, Burke.
Okay, go ahead, sir. Thank you for being patient.
No worries. I'm good at writing things down. So first off, in terms of like, I think it was CCV who came into the point of like understanding Russia. I think before this whole thing started, everybody, the media, conservatives, like everybody was saying there's no way Putin is gonna invade anything. He's just doing empty threats to grandstand and get some leverage. And I think that was a logical conclusion. Like I believe that as well. I think you might not have, right, CTV, but I think like 90% of people believe that. Then he started invading, right? And then people said, okay, he might invade Donbass and Luhansk and like those regions or whatever, but that's all he wants, right? Like he doesn't want anything else. And then he started bombing Kiev. Right? I think if we're looking at what is logical and like what makes sense from like military experience and all these things, I don't think it makes any logical sense any of the things that Putin is doing, right? Like why would you do this if you expect like the most severe sanctions in history? And it is very, very bad. And then for Roseworth, in terms of like president, I feel like you're jumping around because I don't know, maybe it makes you uncomfortable directly engaging with my actual point. So I think your chief point is that you think that if there is a significant risk of nuclear war, you will avoid that at any cost. Right? And I'm saying I don't think that's the case. I think we both know, right, that there are some things that we would risk nuclear war for, right? And that was the point that I was trying to make, right? And you might have a different line than me. That's fine. I just want people to recognize that there are things that we would risk a possibly having a nuclear war for, right? Some of those things might be invasions of like NATO countries, right? Because
Which
it
would
isn't
be a line
given.
of mine, just pointing
Sure.
out there. Yeah.
No, but that's what I'm saying, right? Like it isn't a given necessarily, right? That if Putin says, I want to take Poland, nothing more, that's all I want, and then you can have everything else, right? And like Poland leaves NATO, whatever, and then he's gonna leave. It isn't a given, then you just press like the nukes, right? Like some people might say, and I think that's a logical extension of the argument that you would probably make, Rose Wrist, is that maybe he should have Poland then, right? He should
I
have
would
Ukraine.
disagree. I don't think that's a
No, I
logical.
understand, right? But I don't think that logical follows from the.
I can explain why I think it does.
Sure.
So I think that
No.
the existence of NATO
Go ahead.
and the maintaining of sovereignty of NATO is so exceptionally important in order to dissuade the risks of further nuclearization in the world as a whole, that I think that an invasion of NATO and a trying to destabilization of what it stands for and what it means when it comes to precedent and resistance for invasion warrants all types of action and all types of defense possible.
Sure? So I understand that. Okay. So let's say invading a NATO country is off the table, right? So you would be willing to say you can invade any country that's not NATO. Well, I'm not saying you can, right? Obviously, I understand you're saying we will put sanctions.
We will do everything we can,
everything we can except
that.
Like that's. So whenever I say you're willing to say that, that's what I mean, right?
Okay.
So you're willing to say you can invade any country that's not a NATO country, right? You would be willing to say we will not accept refugees, or like we will kick out the refugees.
No, I'm not willing to accept that.
Okay. So that's also a line.
Number one, I don't think like why would Putin want that to stop
No,
the
I'm
refugees?
saying hypothetically.
I would have to think about that way because that would be like incredibly strange thing for him to say. But also, then I would go back on my previous argument about precedent, how we have accepted a bunch of refugees in the past, and there hasn't been like a threat for
if Putin said that, if we had intelligence, I'm not saying precedent. Like I'm not saying what you think would happen. I'm saying if Putin says, and we had credible intelligence from like the Pentagon or whatever, which said he is fucking serious about this, right? Would you be willing to do that, right? And we have that in terms of him basically saying, Putin saying, if the war in Ukraine continues, Putin, he says he's willing to use nukes, and Pentagon agrees.
But that's not the same as refugees, though.
No. But this is a different example. Like this is probably a better example, right? So would you then be willing to say, tell the Ukrainian people to like stand down and stand by and just let Russia take you, right? Or we will withdraw all support. And you're basically done for like the US.
So I would say no, and we would not accept. We would not like say, okay, sorry, fuck you, refugees, you're not going to come in here because of Russia's threat. Because once again, that would violate like a very broad thing, which is international law, which is the way we handle humanitarian crisis, like humanitarian corridors and handling of refugees.
Already violating international law.
He is violating those, but I think it's a bit different in like how it's being violated now compared to, hey, if you take in every refugees, we're going to nuke you. I think there's a significant difference.
We gotta move it on here, guys. Rose, go ahead and close it out.
A bit more, but yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. We need to get back to the other panelists as well. Prime, sir, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to push back on this idea that America is some sort of shining beacon of hope. It is not. It is not, and I don't know When's the last time it was? The U.S. has its own political and economic interests, and that's what it follows, right? Every so often, when the stars align and there isn't some overriding interest getting in the way, the U.S. will do a good military intervention, right? It'll do something actually quite laudable. But for the most part, no. It's and like I wish that it was different. I wish the U.S. did care. I wish the U.S. Would intervene, and maybe not necessarily all the time militarily, in other conflicts where there are like mass human rights abuses, like what's happening in Ethiopia. But it doesn't, right? So like I reject Rose's claim. He's walked away, but I reject his claim that the America is supposed to be the hope for the world, right? I think have a history to draw upon to see that as absolutely not the case.
Gotcha, Dario.
Instead, I'd say that America is like it's like this like the big brother who is like emotionally unstable, right? Like they go along with their own logic, they have their own logic, and they might be there for you at a time, but mostly it's because they'll get something out of it, right? Like they are a power, it's a possibility you could be defended, but don't rely on them. And I don't think the world should rely on us, right? Like we just haven't proven that we are deserving of that responsibility. It's sad to say for me, but I'm curious if other people agree.
Bryce, go ahead, sir. Then to Race Car, then to Critically Think Veteran, then down to Dario.
So there are a lot of things that I wanted to respond to, but I'm going to specifically respond to Prime. And keep this in mind as I'm saying all this stuff. I love to dump on Americans. I love calling Americans dumb. I love poking fun at them, all that stuff. But at the same time,
whoa, what the fuck, dude? What the fuck?
Bryce, let's
You're on
go.
a goddamn American panel. Are you
You're
serious?
spiritual European
Yep.
now. I give you the spiritual European card.
And who has
Thank
saved
you.
your ass
Yeah, right.
more times than any other
Canadian.
fucking country out there? How dare you? No, I'm fucking with you. Go ahead.
that's okay.
You fucking snow
We-
Mexicans, I swear to God.
You can just consider us. We're basically like your oligarchy, right? Like you get you get Justin Bieber, like all of the Canadians.
No. You
Yeah,
take him.
yeah.
We'll keep Celine Dion. You keep Bieber.
Okay, it's Celine Dion. Okay, learning more about you as the panel goes on. But okay, so Prime was saying that like he's taking issue with America and all this stuff. And while the only thing that I can agree with that you said is that they're not really a beacon of hope, but at the same time, you can't dog on the US for what they have brought, both through their own direct actions like USA and other things, and through like larger like multilateral organizations like the IMF and things that happened after Bretton Woods.
Gotcha,
Right?
Rose.
Like we understand that US is part of like a group of nations that have proven through the course of the last like 60 70 years accounting for like they've proven that they provide for their people through being like a really good representative of democracy, increasing the living standards, increasing the quality of life, spreading culture, like technology, wealth all over the world. Like there are so many W's that like the West and like America bring to the rest of the world that it's really tough to say that like they're at all comparable to like Russia and China and these other nations, right? Like, are they perfect? No. But I think that another component that shows like, how they
I
excel.
want to respond to this when I can, please, John.
Sure.
Gotcha.
And I want to respond to you afterwards, Prime, because you were shaking your head a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
So, and the other thing is that like as much as there are maybe like domestic strife, like infighting in political parties, like political like 50-50 divides, like all these things, they're still like advancing human rights like across the board. Like there are significant great progressions throughout America's history, and that does have an impact. Like yes, like they've lagged behind in terms of what they were like in like the 20th century, but they're still like a leading member of like a group of nations that really like set the tone for the rest of the world.
All right. Now it's over to Race Car, then to Critically Thinking Veteran, Prime, Rose, and then Dario.
I think Prime wanted to respond though.
Prime, did you want
Can I get a
to?
direct
Race Car,
response
do you
to
mind
this?
if he responds?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so
Prime,
much.
you go ahead and respond.
Okay. Yeah. So one, I never said that the U.S. is comparable to Russia. Never said that. Never said it. I wouldn't say that. Right? That wouldn't make any sense. Of course, the U.S. has done good in the world. Right? Like I don't know. I guess maybe I come off as a blame America first leftist, and I actually do a lot. But I can recognize the nuanced situation. The U.S. has done a lot of good for the world in general, right? That's different from being the quote unquote, at least my conceptualization of like a beacon of hope, right? Of some sort of unqualified good in the world. Like our history says absolutely otherwise. You brought up the IMF. The IMF is an example of the U.S. and the terrible things it does, in which it uses economic power to impose favorable conditions, right? Political and economic conditions in other countries. Like, oh, you don't want this money? Okay, well, redesign your economy so that it's favorable to foreign capital investments, right? Like, what? Like, don't invest in your own education. Don't invest in your own industries, right? Like, no, redesign your economy so that others can come and invest in there, right? And the problems that causes. No, I don't think the IMF is an example of the U.S., right? And its infinite compassion, right? And like it being a hope for people around the world because of how it treats its people. Well, which people, right? There are a lot of groups in the U.S. that have suffered immensely under this great democratic regime that we've had, right? We don't have to go down that route, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I don't like the more you talked, the more I was sure of my point. That the U.S. Falls short in all these things, and the world should understand that, right? And just like adjust its calculations, its political and foreign policy calculations based on that. That you can't rely on the U.S. for help. Simply not.
All right, we go over to race car.
All right, so I'm gonna kind of bring this to a different perspective because. You know, going back to the United States being the world police, and I think honestly they're, you know, me seeing this from as an American, and I'm kind of just throwing this as a what if kind of scenario. What if the rest of the world has gotten complacent because of our world influence, and they see now that we're trying to back out so much as being that dominant role as far as like being the military go-to in all these situations, then what? You know, like, and to say that the United States isn't like the bastion of hope and freedom and everything, look at our southern border. We've got people just absolutely flowing in. So to say that we're not is an absolute lie when you've got people that absolutely want to be here.
That's Prime. All right, we're kicking over to Critically Thinking Veteran, Rose, Dario, Bryce, and then back to Prime.
Yeah, it's actually that time for me, John. So I'll say this on the way out.
Okay.
Until we get to the point that Europeans understand that they need to be the masters of their own destiny and not have the United States and its nuclear triad, right, as its, backup, right? Because the fact of the matter is that one, say Russia decided to nuke Brussels, right? Well, guess who the response is going to be expected to come from? The United States, mutually assured destruction, right? So there's a nuke that goes off in Europe. The United States launches, and then in retaliation to that, Russia launches at the United States. That's not a hard line of logic to follow, and I don't know that this current administration is going to be able to follow that, right, to the nth degree. I'm honestly very concerned with leadership right now. That said, thank you for the invite tonight. Wish it could have been last week because it would have had full time, but I already had this prior engagement. So on the way out, you can find me twitch.tv/critically thinking veteran. And John, send me an invite to another one, brother. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for being here tonight, brother.
See you, Crit.
All right,
Yeah,
we're going to push
Crit.
it down to Rose, then to Dario, then to Bryce, then to Prime. Rose, go ahead.
Yeah, so in regards to the rest of the world becoming somewhat complacent because of the US, yeah, there's definitely this pressure that absolutely exists. But like I mentioned before, more of Europe is becoming uncomfortable with this, and more of Europe is deciding that, hey, we need to pick up our own thing and we need to make sure we can have, own self-determination in that regard. I'm, for example, in favor of an EU army, and there's a lot of discussions about that going on right now. So trust us, more of the world is coming to realize this. Okay, we're not just freeloading that much off of your back, but yeah, it still happens to some extent, obviously, and a lot of it is because people have come to the realization more that the US can be pretty unreliable. And that links us perfectly into the whole thing that was going on between Bryce and PrimeCayes. the US is absolutely flawed. They have had a wide range and wide number of different blunders in its history, you know, foreign policy stuff, whether we're talking Vietnam or we're talking Iraq. But we still need to recognize that it does do some good stuff. So, you know, whether we're talking about the Marshall Plan, or if you ask any Eastern European about NATO and the security that has provided them from Russian influence, and how happy they were to be part of NATO, and how well that protected them from Russian influence, and how much safer they feel within their country, and how much more stable their elections are, and how much more secure their economies are. This is incredible for so many countries in Eastern Europe, and I feel like a lot of people often underestimate how important NATO was for Eastern Europe. Then there's some other things we can talk about as well in terms of medical development. Now, the US medical system is pretty flawed in a lot of different regards when it comes to the citizens' access to healthcare, but also does certain things really well when it comes to research or development. So there's stuff like that to mention as well. So once again, there are definitely flaws for the US. There are definitely things that the US does really well. And I think that we need to try to, hey, encourage the good things that the US does and try to limit the bad things as much as possible, while at the same time ensuring that other countries don't become complacent by advocating for things like the, you know, an EU army and stuff like that. But yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and kick it over to it was Dario next.
Yeah. I actually had a response to you, Berg. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, go ahead, brother.
Participate more.
Yeah, I would love to. If the panelists are okay with me participating more,
yeah. I
okay, then absolutely. Yeah, I didn't want to make it feel like anybody would feel like I was favoriting or not. But if you're okay with it, I will 100% get involved.
Yeah. So I actually,
Dario, let's do it.
No, I want to start by saying I actually 100% agree with what you said in terms of like the US, like who gets to make those decisions, right? And I actually agree with that, right? I think when it comes to like when push comes to shove, I don't think we should tell other countries how they should live, like what values they should have, and like how they want to structure their country, right? I think if a country wants to be socialist or communist or whatever, I think they should be allowed to do so, right? But I do think there's a line for me when it comes to like basic human rights, and I think so. Like a very simple hypothetical would be like people make this meme all the time. Like, what if Hitler didn't go outside of Germany, right? So if Hitler just stayed in Germany, like where he was like the ruler or whatever, and he decided to like do a genocide within Germany, right? Like just kill all the Jews, like do the concentration camps, whatever. I think the world needs to act there, and I feel very strongly about that. Like I think when there's like when it becomes bad enough, I think a country doesn't just get to be sovereign, right? Because you can't just do whatever the fuck you want to like human beings. And I think the entire world should act there. I don't think it's just the US. And I think actually, and I agree with you, that's a very big problem. I think the world should be united. And actually, funnily enough, right, like in terms of like all of this Ukraine stuff, Denmark actually took a vote recently, or didn't, but is planning to take a vote in terms of like increasing the military capacity of Denmark, because it has been slacking up because of like the US and like what the US does to be like world police. And it is taking a vote right now in terms of like increasing the military to like 3% of GDP. And I support that because I actually agree that I don't think the US should be the world police, but I think everybody should pitch in. And I think the only thing that we should be doing is actually protecting fundamental human rights.
I understand where you're coming from on that, and there's 2 points I want to make in response to that. Number one, in regards to Germany, Hitler was already doing that. The war was already raging roughly 2 years before America got pulled in. America was still isolationist based. Even Britain was getting its ass handed to it, and it's not a slight towards Britain. I'm just simply saying that in our historic past, that's how we were. But the second point I want to make is that we can frame these arguments in a very black and white style framework, if you will. Let's look at Iraq and Afghanistan. These issues are not so simplistic as they're murdering their own people, we need to go get involved. It's way more in depth than that. And I know, and I haven't interjected my opinion on this, this Ukraine issue with Russia, America has fault in this. This is why I am not for getting involved in Ukraine. I think that we are doing it the right way by providing them armament up to an extent. But if Putin takes Ukraine, then Putin takes Ukraine. Because if we look back to 2008 when Georgia got its ass handed to it by Russia, EU was hyping the hell out of Georgia. Georgia thought it was strong, flexed on Russia, and Russia beat the fuck out of them. Prior to the fall, or once the Soviet Union fell, Bush Sr. made a promise to Russia. And I'm not a Russian apologist. I don't like Russia. I don't like China. I don't trust them. But I will sit here and be at least open-minded enough to say that Russia has been getting poked and poked and poked, and we have been trying to involve them. We have been fucking with them. We've been fucking with Putin for a very long time. Bush Sr. made a promise on behalf of America that NATO will not expand. What happened? Balkan states became NATO. And I know, and I disagree with conservatives on this one, as far as like Shapiro and the rest of them that say that, Ukraine serves the buffer with NATO. And they say, well, what about, you got all these other ones that border? Well, they're also 100% dependent upon Russian oil. So they're actually getting their cake and eating it too. They're getting protection from NATO, and they're getting Russian oil. They're getting some damn good deals there. But as far as what's going on with Ukraine, why is nobody talking about the fact that after the coup, the illegal coup, and I know there's no such thing as legal or illegal when it comes to war, it's just the way it is. When the 2014 coup happened, it was an overthrow, a violent overthrow of a democratically elected pro-Russian government. That's what Ukraine wanted. So Ukraine overthrew it, and then there was two parties on the right that were saying, we want to take charge, and then the CIA gets involved and says which one's more pro-Western. So we back Pachev or whatever the fuck that dude's name is. He takes power. And then now you have a pro-Western Ukraine, but this dude's playing both sides. And then once again, we have all the stuff. We have money pouring into Ukraine. You've got Biden's son Hunter, who received oil. I forget what the energy company was. It was actually a board member of. It's so intertwined. Thank you. It's so intertwined. It's not black and white. So when you have the new president takes over in 2014, then starts shelling eastern Ukraine, killing over 14,000 civilians, why did nobody care then? And this is the point that I want to make to all of you. All of these issues that exist in the world, you only care about, and I'm not faulting you for this, it's because the MSM wants you to care about it. Nobody gave a shit about Ukraine in 2014. Nobody really fucking cared, especially America. We didn't really know about it. It wasn't a big deal. Nobody really gave a fuck about Iraq. Once we started getting involved, it was kind of like, oh, it was a big deal for like a few years, and then people were like, whatever, it's over. So I think in a lot of these situations, I think the one thing that we tend to forget, it's these people in power and these government roles that are getting our countries involved in these fucking endless wars, and it's each one of you on these panels, you're going to go fight it. That's my issue, and I don't want that. If these political fucking... You get what I'm saying. If it escalates into a world war, you get what I'm going. You're going to fight. Once the draft occurs, and Dario, feel free to counter that, but that's just my stance on it. It's not so black and white, and I agree with you. I think it sucks when these genocides happen, but bro, and I hate to say this, but America had its civil war. America had its issues, and that's why we're very blessed to live here, because we underwent those processes. If China wants to pull out of communism as they wanted to prior to COVID breaking in 2019, they were on the verge of protesting. They were calling for the Second Amendment to get involved. They wanted Trump to get involved. It's like, no, that ain't our fight. But that's just where I stand on it. Go ahead, Dario. Go ahead, sir.
Wait, can I ask a question, Bert? Just as something I can.
Yeah.
I can look at.
If Dario's cool with it.
Yeah, it's just a quick Google.
Yeah, absolutely.
You say Bush promised Putin not to expand it? Okay. Do you remember what year this was?
It was right after the fall of the Soviet Union. I want to say 91, 92. Bush Sr., and there's the thing, and this is the fucked up part. It was a verbal agreement. It was never anything signed, but Bush had made the promise that NATO was not going to expand anymore because Putin was getting nervous that American influence over NATO country or Europe in general, even China was worried. It's like, it's too much. And the equivalency to that is like, say like Canada and China and Russia formed a freaking alliance, and then they got Canada involved and then Mexico involved. And then, of course, American interests could be like, wait a minute, you're on our borders. We're not cool with this. Because then you basically got a Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0. Dario, over to you. Then Bryce, you got your hand up. Go ahead, sir.
I was also in line.
I'm sorry, Prime. Yeah, we'll do Dario, Prime, then Bryce. Go ahead, Dario. And I won't respond. That way we can keep going.
Yeah, sure. So just to respond, and I agree with a lot of what you said, and I do think that people don't actually care most of the time, like unless it is actually fed to them by the media, and I think that's a big problem, right? I think we should care, right? What I'm coming to, and I'm saying, I think we should care more. Right, I don't think we should be inconsistent, and I agree that a lot of fucked up things have happened. A lot of fucked up things are going to continue to happen, and we should not, we shouldn't look at it black and white, and we shouldn't just be like, oh well, that's what I'm saying. Oh well, fucked up stuff has happened. It's very complicated, so we shouldn't do anything, right? That's what I'm saying. I think we need to draw a line somewhere, right? And I don't really like to get into the personal stuff like most of the time, right? But
yeah, go ahead.
And I'm literally like a refugee from the Bosnian genocide, right? And the U.S. and NATO intervened there, and if they didn't, I might have not been alive today, right? My family might have not been alive today, right? So I owe a debt, like well, probably not personally, right? But like my family and like Bosnia owns a debt to the United States and NATO, and I think just that, I think obviously that biases me, right? But that also shows me sort of what the world should be doing, I think, is to sometimes, and obviously not every time, right? But like sometimes at least, like at least have it on the table and be like, listen,
Sorry.
sometimes fucked up stuff happens, and somebody needs to do something, right? And it shouldn't be the U.S. alone, but it should be the world.
Can I? I was wanna. Oh fuck! He walked away. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. No, it was over to Prime next.
He can respond if he likes.
All right, go ahead, Rose. Go ahead.
Very small. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you're talking about the 1 inch eastward code because Putin was elected or was put into power. Yeah, he took power. He won the election in 2012, and that wasn't when Bush
I think.
was doing it.
Just to add really quick to what you're saying, I'm pretty sure.
Sorry,
they said
I shouldn't have said Putin.
Berlin Wall.
Soviet, yeah.
Okay, is it Gorbachev then? I would imagine.
I forget who it was. I want to say it was right after the Soviet wall had fallen, or the USSR.
That would have been Gorbachev, yeah.
Yeah,
That wasn't Putin.
Yeah. So was this the agreement?
but even
was this the like 1 inch eastward one? Was that the verbiage?
there was supposedly a verbal agreement, but even if I'm wrong on that, the fact still stands though of American.
Correct.
If
There was.
the fact, okay, so even if there wasn't, the fact still stands. In regards to influence over European countries, Russia got worried. That's the point that I'm trying to make there.
Yeah, but so I want to talk about this Russians worry. So it's not like a worry Russia is worried about like NATO invasion or NATO encroachment. It's just like it's a threat to Russia's interests, sure, but those interests are interests of expansionism, interests of imperialism.
Mhm.
And sure, Russia can feel cornered by that in the sense that they can no longer just fuck with their Eastern European neighbors as much as they want. But to some extent, I don't.
Wait.
I don't
When you
care.
say fuck with your Eastern European neighbor, what are you referring to? Like outside of Georgia and Ukraine.
That, like, if you talk to a lot of the countries that were previously part of the Warsaw Pact, there's been a lot of Russian meddling and intervention into their elections, them just fucking and just yoinking small parts of territory.
Can you name me a country that doesn't exist?
What do you mean that doesn't exist?
I mean, America does it. There's a lot of countries that do that. And I'm not justifying it, but I'm certainly not saying that should be grounds for...
That should be grounds for them to be allowed to join a defensive military alliance that has thus far been shown to completely dissuade that type of imperialism?
I mean, shit, that's a hard... Something like that, then no. I would have to say that's not something that I would say could disqualify somebody in regards to, I mean, not being able to join NATO. If we look at Ukraine, Ukraine was offered. They were considering it, and Ukraine's got one of the most corrupted governments that exists to this day. I mean, fuck, even the American government's corrupt as fuck. I mean, I can't find a damn government out there that isn't corrupt.
Yeah, Ukraine couldn't join NATO because there were border disputes since 2014 because of Crimea.
I'm dragging that. But well, actually, no, because during this whole event, they said they were considering possibly letting Ukraine join NATO, and Ukraine denied it. That's what I was talking about earlier. I think it was Prime was talking, that they actually turned the offer down. They said no.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, I just want to underline that NATO has... I don't like the term NATO expansionism either because it sounds like NATO is like expanding in the same way that like a Russian sphere of influence is expanding, like in Belarus, for example, or like.
Well, wait, hold on. I got to disagree there. there. Who's the lead? Who are the lead people in NATO? It's not so. I'm exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's not. I'm not saying that NATO is sovereign, but NATO definitely has a lot of Western influence in it, and that's what scares the hell out of Russia. It would scare the hell out of me if I was Putin. It's like, wait a minute, you got way too much power and control over here. So in a sense, it's like when Putin said, I'm tired of playing these games. I'm taking Ukraine back. I get where he's coming. I'm not condoning it, but he's been provoked and he's lashing out. Do you think
the control between that Russia has that NATO has on, for example, Romania is the same that Russia has on Belarus? Do you think those are comparable?
I think you're isolating two different points there, but I'm saying overall in regards to all of NATO. All of NATO.
Any
absolutely,
NATO country. So, do you think can you name one NATO country that has as much NATO influence as Belarus has Russian influence?
Well, Belarus, they fight for Russia. They're with Russia. So
they're pretty much a puppet state of Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think that country's part of NATO or a puppet state of the U.S. or a puppet state of NATO?
I would have to say no.
Okay, so then
I mean they're fighting. They're fighting for Russia. Yeah.
You mean they're fighting against Russia?
So I think what John is saying is that it's like there's two sides, right? And like the question is like, who are you going to side with when push comes to shove, right? And I think Putin is just like, from his perspective, I definitely understand how Putin is justifiably scared of like NATO having more and more countries within it, right? But I think from a world perspective, like looking at it from like if you're for like a third party, to this, right? I don't think it's a justified thing to bar countries from joining NATO because Putin is afraid, right? Because I don't think there's any way that NATO is ever going to attack Russia, right? At least I don't think that's like on the table, right? So it's a defensive alliance, and what Putin is afraid of is that he's not going to be able to exert more influence over countries through like military or like by installing like a puppet dictator, right?
Absolutely.
But I think that's a good thing, right?
And he cares about that way more than he cares about NATO expansionism, right? Because if NATO expansionism was a primary, if NATO expansionism was a primary concern, then holy fuck, Russia's last few decades of meddling in Eastern Europe is probably the worst possible thing they could have done if they were worried about NATO expansionism and more countries becoming sympathetic to NATO. So I think if that was their primary concern, then they would put aside their imperialist ambitions and just be like, hey, whoa, let's just focus on treaties and stuff like that, and NATO doesn't have to expand. But that's not their main interest. What they care the most about is being able to kind of reform a spiritual Soviet Union and have a bunch of imperialism going on in the Eastern European countries, and they're willing to do that despite knowing that that will probably lead to NATO expansionism. So they don't really care about NATO expansionism mostly. They care mostly
real
about
quick, as long as we can keep this cordial, guys, feel free to go ahead and talk. You don't have to raise your hand. As long as we don't interrupt each other, interject points, feel free to go ahead. Prime, we'll start with you, and then we'll go off of that.
Thank you so much. And to you, John, you
Yes, sir.
mentioned something about China moving away from communism and then like wanting like a Second Amendment type rights. Do you have?
Not, I'm sorry. Let me clarify. Not China as a country. The protests that were occurring right before COVID in Hong Kong, when they were beating the shit out of their own people, they were saying they wanted a Second Amendment. They were wanting Trump to get involved. That's what I'm referring to. I'm not saying China as a sovereign nation.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's what I thought. I remember Hong Kong.
No, I would say that.
Words coming out. I mean, and by Hong Kong, I mean like a group in Hong Kong that wanted that. Okay, fair enough. Okay. Then this is from a long time ago. To our friend Race Car there. Hello. We're talking about how people pouring across our southern border as an example of the U.S. being a bastion of hope. I don't look at it that way. People leave their nations for all sorts of reasons, right? One is to find a better economic, a better economic future for themselves, right? But there are political refugees, there are economic refugees, there are natural disaster refugees. There are people fleeing violence, wars, like all those reasons as to why people make those moves. And it's not necessarily because the U.S. is some sort of bastion of hope. It's more that like it is a safer harbor than the one that they are existing in, right? In the home that they probably would want to stay in the first place. So but then looking at how the U.S. has actually interfered in those countries to say that, like, okay, the U.S. is a bastion of hope when countries within our sphere of influence have suffered immensely from our interventions, right? Speaking of those, from military interventions, economic interventions, political interventions, right? Assassinations. That doesn't sound like a beacon of hope. It sounds like a nation that's thrown around its might to its own benefit, and that the people there are simply responding to those various forces that have tossed them around during history. And then, and I'd love to hear your response soon, Racecraft, if you have one. And then to my man Dario, shout out to my man Dario here. I hear you and your experiences, your life, personal experiences. Dario, if you were to press me on interventionism and the way that you do, Dario, right, the very specific way that you always press people, if you were able to do that to me on intervention, I would you would find that I am very inconsistent. I
think most people are.
Yeah,
I can respect the fact of your self-awareness. I respect the fact that you have that self-awareness. Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. I have this dueling priorities, right, for me. One, I don't like war in general, right? In general, I don't like war. I don't like sending Americans off to die in some far off land, right? It's not something I want to do. Two, I don't like other people dying in wars because in far off lands because of political strife or whatever it might be, right? Or ethnic strife. I hate that, and I have compassion for those. I think their lives matter just as much as anyone else's, and they should be valued. And I want there to be that beacon of hope. I wish that was the case, that we were that beacon of hope, and so that we would go help those people somehow, in some way, again, not necessarily militarily, but to step in and if not declare a person who was right and who was wrong, at least to break up sides, right? To stand in between these like major conflicts, right? And I'm being quite vague here, but I'm trying to encompass all these various possibilities here. I want, but at the same time, like I understand. Well, I believe I understand the history of it all, and the history says otherwise of the U.S. That like it will look at its own economic priorities first, right? That it will take care of that, and it will put in place, right? It'll put in place people in those countries that will perform those human rights violations in like 10 more years, right? Those are the people we're intervening against. So like while I want the U.S. to take that role, I simply can't trust it to. Now, we do have that's a general sense, right? Like a general sense of what the U.S. foreign policy should be. But specifically for this conflict, right? It's not as if the U.S. is, at least I don't think so, is trying to impose itself on Ukraine, right? It's trying to, it's defending against an aggressor. That's a good thing, I think. That's a good thing. I think your instincts, Dario, and that you want the U.S. to for this type of conflict, you want the U.S. to intervene. I think it's laudable. But the consequences are just so huge, and I don't blame Biden for being absolutely cautious with this because if he's wrong, we'll all know about it. I'm done.
You can interject, guys. Y'all can interject.
For sure. Yeah, I think. Oh.
No, I wanted to counter the point that I know our argument going back and forth, Prime, is completely off topic, but most of these refugees that are coming through our southern border are coming from all the way in Central South America, not just Mexico. So there are several other countries they either have to pass through or they're a lot closer to go to, but yet they choose to come to us, and that's the point that I'm making. Like whether they're trying to escape, their country's political system, their economical system, it doesn't matter. They want to be here. That's the thing. That's the sole point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
So,
I wanted to just respond to what you said, Prime, and say I 100% understand where you're coming from, and I have very much recognized that it has gone wrong in the past, like many times, right? Like I'm not
many times.
I'm not a supporter of the war in Iraq, like all of these things, like Afghanistan, like all of these things, right? Not a supporter at all, right? But what I'm saying is, I wish for a better future, right? And I think that is I think the only alternative is that we need a better future where not the U.S. but like the entire world or like most of the world, or in be it NATO, be it some kind of international community of like military or whatever, to be like, there are some things that we need to do to protect, to intervene, right? And I don't like the US going at it alone, because I think many times that's where we get like the bad stuff happening, right? Like the leaders, like they're doing things within US economic interest, all of that, right? I think that's what happens when it's one country doing it alone. And I think that's where, like, because they don't balance the priorities, right? But what I'm saying is the alternative for me is a non-starter, right? Because the alternative is, if we're saying we don't trust the US, we don't think they should be doing this right now, we don't trust NATO, we don't think NATO should be doing this right now, the alternative is we're looking at atrocities and we're saying we don't trust anyone to stop it, right? Yeah. And I don't think that's acceptable. Yeah, I think
I know Bryce has been trying to interject
for something better.
Okay, so
Bryce, go ahead.
That's fine. Sorry.
Yeah, Bryce had a chance to talk.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, Prime. A number of different things. First, for something going all the way back to something earlier you said, Prime, you said something about IMF and like trying to force them to meet like capital gains or like capital. I can't remember exactly your exact phrasing, but about the IMF reformation or like requirements.
Economic restructuring. I didn't use that term. But
yeah.
On that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just reminded of there was a debate between Vosh and Econoboy, and Vosh tried to use those very similar talking points with regard. He was honestly like looking at the wiki for IMF and almost like reading some of the points verbatim, and it's kind of like a complete misunderstanding of what IMF loans and the relationships look like. IMF loans are usually aimed at like actually causing some kind of development and improvements, and they usually don't force everything. You can look at recent examples in Nigeria, where the Nigerian government is doing certain decisions with regards to like gas prices, if I remember right, and the IMF is like, no, 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 like you need to be a little more austere, like you need to like chill out with some of your like government spending, and Nigeria's like, no, like no, we think we have it under control. We're gonna do what we think is best, and that's just like the IMF completed their report. They sent the advisor to Nigeria, and then the guy came back from, and it wasn't like the IMF is like, okay, time to cut off Nigeria from all the money. It was literally like, okay, that like we did our best. As long as you can continue to make your payments on the loan, we've given you our advisor. We think this is what you should do. That's that. Like the relationship, when you look at the articles, like the conditions of membership, there's no delineation of anything like requirements in the way that you're saying it. You kind of try to present, you and Vosh and like a lot of these lefties try to present these conditions and like components of the relationship as being like nefarious and like neoliberal like agenda and like all this stuff, and it's not. It is purely and simply that like these are international banks and they're giving fuck tons of money to states, and the states are the clients, and they expect their clients to be able to repay those loans.
Yeah, by
I want to come about the IMF stuff.
Austerity, right? Like, yeah, though it's not as if those that money is being given with no strings attached, right? Like not being able to be paid back for a loan, that's okay, right? But to put put conditions, right, that encourage austerity, I think is a problem, because that austerity ends up hurting the people. The people.
Well, that's not always the case. Like they don't. If you look at the report if you look at the recent report to Nigeria, about Nigeria from the advisor that was there, they specifically say that like, yeah, like there are a lot of really important things like social spending. Like maybe back in like the 80s, around like Thatcher and like Reagan's time, maybe that's what the IMF would have done. But the IMF has gone through like a bit of like not a renaissance, but like significant changes where they realized like, okay, like as much as we do need to be careful with our fiscal policy, with how we like spend and like balance the budget, like there are some like legitimate things that states do need to spend their money on.
Sure. Well, I don't think the IMF should be the one to decide that, but I'll I'll leave it at this and say that I don't know the specific case of Nigeria, so I can't really speak onto that. But I think the IMF has very clear history. Now, if they're changing, that'd be great, right? If they are giving states more leeway as to what they do, like with their own economics, then I think that's absolutely fair. But it feels like the people who are wanting to be repaid, right, with of course interest, wanting to make a profit here, I think those people who sit in offices in New York and London and Paris, I think those people don't give a shit about the people on the other side of the ledger, right? The people who suffer under economic conditions that they can help encourage.
I think that's kind of. I think that's a little.
We need to push it over to Rose real quick. He's been having his hands up. Rose, go ahead.
On the IMF stuff, one of the biggest issues that I wish that, yeah, obviously with the discussion swayed a bit, so I would have loved to have more specific examples on hand. But I remember I watched the same debate you talked about, Bryce, and then did a lot of I did some independent reading as well into it. And the IMF does have a bit of a history of being sometimes pretty out of touch when it comes to what requirements that they're asking of the countries that they give loans to. Now, is the IMF doing this because they want to throw these countries into ruin? No, they're doing this because, hey, economic development is incredibly complicated, and what different countries need is going to vary a lot on a case-by-case basis. And one of the major things that the IMF's requirements kind of struggle with sometimes is they tend to lean a bit heavy into the liberalization thing and too short of a short term. So while those policies absolutely, once some of the basics are in place, once institutional power is established, once things like political stability are put in place, once important government services and stuff like that are put in place, then yes, those policies are absolutely important. But the IMF has a bit of a history of being a bit preemptive with those things and being a bit out of touch with the interest and having kind of like a blanket plan a bit for, okay, this is going to be like the standard that we assume from you once you take a loan. And sometimes those standards are a bit out of line with what that country needs at the moment for economic development. And as an effect of that, these requirements really end up well for a lot of countries.
So there's a couple of things that I want to respond to. Firstly, like economics as a whole is kind of like a pretty young scientific field, and so there was a lot of stuff in the IMF advisors, like advisories early on, where that's kind of like what they thought was for the best interest. And yeah, like obviously, there are a number of different countries examples in the early days after the Bretton Woods where they were operating out of like particular like theories that didn't have the same empirical basis that we do now. Like economics in the last like 20 to 30 years has really made like a huge fuck ton of like advancements in terms of like actual like scientific evolution, right? It's no longer just some like political theory. It's more of a like statistics and like mathematical field. And as a result of that, a lot of the economists that are working in these jobs are evolving the policies that they're like the advice that they're giving to places like World Bank, IMF. And it's not just these Western ones, right? Everything that we're saying applies to like the Asian Development Bank, other like development banks that are like spread out across the world. Like is it
funny if I cut in a little bit there about the science thing?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
So while I agree, definitely, economics is a young field. We're definitely learning a lot. We're definitely moving away from some of the more like hardline, more like pure, logic model thing instead of more empirical data that we have seen for like neoclassical models and stuff like that. While that's absolutely true, I think that distilling this to, okay, now it's just more of like a science basis kind of implication that there isn't so much normativity going on. I think that's missing a few things because fundamentally, hey, the interest of the IMF is to get repayment on their loans and to be a profitable institution. And a lot of times that interest correlates with the interest of, obviously, if this country does better, they're going to be able to pay back better, and we're going to have those things. However, because those are not the same incentive, there are instances where the policies do not overlap perfectly, and in those edge cases, there's a lot of issues. And the reason why I'm comparing this to like the science thing is because the science thing and that it's just crunching numbers, that kind of presumes like a set of normativity already, which we know is different between the IMF and the countries. Okay. So there's still a bit of ideology and mismatch a bit in incentives there that make it not.
Gentlemen, I hate to cut this short. We need to move into round two. We've gone a long time on this one topic. This next topic's gonna be a little bit shorter, but real quick, we're gonna take a 5-minute recess. I gotta plug the show sponsor, and then we're gonna come back. So it is currently 8:53. Let's make it 8:50. We'll make it 8:58. Be back by 8:58. I gotta talk to the audience, and then we will resume to round two. And that should be it for the night. So I'll be right back. Y'all can continue talking, but I'm going to step out of Discord real quick so we can talk to the audience. If y'all need to take a break, go ahead and do it now, by the way, just so you know.
Okay. Yeah, do you have something more you want to add to that, Bryce?
Yeah. So something to remember with like economics is that in the majority of the models, one of the fundamental things that we do is like, well, I should say we, because I study economics. One of the main things that we do is that we make a couple of key assumptions, and before like that model gets tested and like we look at like the results of the model, we do use like different assumptions. So I think the best like concession that I will agree with you on is that there are assumptions built into a lot of different models that the IMF would probably use for different advice, and what that would manifest as is like, yes, like if there's a particular need, there's a chance that need could not be met or might be adversely impacted by the IMF model because of those assumptions. Like there's potential for error, right? But I think one thing that I really see like a lot of like internet people, and it's not really their fault because it doesn't really get talked about or taught much, is that like literally it's the line go up meme, right? Like when line goes up, like everybody benefits, right? Like the reason why like there's not some like evil nefarious shit and like an economist or whatever where like everybody is trying to like fuck everybody and just get rich, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these economists, economic thinkers really do want people to do well. Like when you look at like Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen, who like did like the Human Development Index and like the capabilities approach, like a lot of these people really do want to see like a better world and like see people develop on like these like the BRICS nations like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the more like the countries that are really close to being developed countries. Like people want to see those succeed. Like they want to see the global economy grow. So they, uh, it just seems kind of unfair to assume that everybody's just in it to get rich. And
yeah, so I very specifically said I don't think any of this is because there's like malicious that they're like, okay, fuck these countries, don't care. We're gonna just do our thing. I explicitly say I don't think that is the case. But
okay,
yeah, but when you said the thing of like, oh, at this point it's more of just like running the numbers and running the calculations to see what's going to have the best effect. I mean, sure, once you have a goal in mind, so let's say you're the IMF and your goal is okay. We're a bank. We need to accomplish our motives when it comes to our financial management and our profits. Once you have that as a set goal, at that point it's mathematics. Okay, how do we get the highest numbers in these metrics, calculations, policies, blah 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 blah. Then it's mathematics. Now for those countries, they're like, okay, what do we want to accomplish? We want to accomplish this levels of human, on this human development index. We want to have these levels of stability. We want to have this amount of GDP per capita. We want to have these sectors grow by this much. Then you have numbers, and from that point on, it's just calculations. But when it comes to the interactions between two of these entities, obviously, because they have different end goals, it's no longer just an issue of calculations that when it comes to how that interaction takes place. It's calculation, sure, but it's also the slight mismatch between the two ideas and what they want to do. And that's just what I wanted to point out.
Yeah, fair. The last thing that I was just going to say is that, and I've had kind of forgotten what I was wanting to say, but where I was going with a lot of that is the whole like line go up meme is that really, and what I was going to say is that a lot of people on the internet and like left, and it's not their fault because like I said, it doesn't get talked about, is that like GDP growth rate does have a really strong positive correlation to an increase in standard of living for like everybody. So like when the economy grows and when like everybody is getting richer, basically everybody benefits, right? Like there's more goods and more it doesn't have to be just private goods and services. It can also be public goods and services and like infrastructure and like social institutions, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, all else equal, ceteris paribus, obviously. Yeah, they absolutely benefit. Yeah, but then there obviously you study economics, you obviously know. But then there is line go up. Line go up is important. Line go up is good. Yeah, but line go up is not all.
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like I think, and to me, this I think that's where we have to continue to like talk about the ESG stuff and like really refine that and try to like improve, which is like environment.
Sustainability.
It's like environment. Yeah, it does environment something sustainability or like sustenance and governance. I think.
Okay.
I can't remember. It's like they're basically indexes where they're trying to gauge like how mindful of those three things different investments are, and to give like a grade on that investment. And it's kind of like not so great right now, but it's also like in its infancy. Like it's something that's pretty new.
Just
and I
say,
think when we
can I-
talk about...
Oh,
sorry.
No, I just wanted to say I actually 100% agree with what you said about economics, Rosewist, which is also why I think economics is incredibly boring. And
No,
actually,
it's so interesting. What do you mean?
It is incredibly
It is really
boring
interesting.
because all of the important conversations happen before economics, right? Because when you think about it, right? What I think like the valuable conversations are about like ethics and like what do we actually value. And when you agree with that, right, then it's just numbers at that point, and then you just put the numbers into a formula, and then you figure stuff out, right?
But those numbers are hella important and hella difficult, right?
I agree. I agree.
Numbers,
but I think that's the important, like, because you can convince me of anything. Like, if we agree on values, you can literally convince me of anything. If you just go like, I done the math, and this is the correct way to get at your values, and I can just go like, yep, seems good. Like,
yeah, but then there's also
really
the question of
gentlemen,
values
I hate to
don't
interrupt.
translate. Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. We've got to move on to round two. This is the final round of tonight's debates. Very controversial, a lot more opinion based on this one. I know this is why I picked it. So here we go.
More controversial than Ukraine.
Well, actually, yeah, oddly enough. Swimmer Leah Thomas becomes first openly transgender athlete to win Division I national championship. He was quoted as saying, "I try to ignore it as much as I can," transgender swimmer Leah Thomas said of the mounting criticism she's faced over eligibility to compete in the NCAA national championship. Gentlemen, where do you stand on this topic right now in regards to transgender women competing in actual biological women's sports and vice versa? We're going to go 1-minute intros, and then we're going to open it up to roundtable discussion. Bryce, you're shaking your head over there, so we're going to start with you. You've got 1 minute on the clock. Where do you stand on what's currently going on with sports? Go ahead.
Well, I was just honestly just saying out loud that I don't know. It rubs me the wrong way. I think that like gender and sex are really complicated topics that have a lot of really important talking points and like specifics, and you can't like reduce everything like a lot of people on different positions might try to reduce everything. So I think that when we look at like, I'm all about like trans rights. I'm not like, I support trans rights like immensely, but at the same time there are still new rules I remember that are being introduced that I don't know that were currently applied at the time of that medal awarding, where an athlete has to go through like a certain level of HRT before they're able to participate in the like opposite gender, or like I don't know how you would phrase it. So like at the same time, I think that might not even be like tough enough. Like I think that we do need to be. I think it's fine. I think that there is probably a plateau. Like there are probably conditions where trans athletes can meet those conditions and participate. But I also think that in the case of like Leah Thomas, like you look at a side by side photo. Look at a side by side photo of like the top American female Olympians, swimmers from the last like 50 years, and to me that should be an indication that there's some complexity to the subject, and
All right.
I think it's important to talk about it.
Dario, down to you, sir. Go ahead.
It's actually funny that you bring this because I literally just like wrote up like a big tweet thread about this. So I'm actually just gonna read my tweet thread to you guys because I think like I put my point as succinctly as I could. So I think I currently hold the position that trans women should be able to compete in women's sports. I've seen a lot of research on this, and none have yet satisfied my criteria to change my mind. But if it does, I'm more than willing to change my mind on this. So my criteria is as follows. What I would need to see in order to ban trans women from competing in women's sports would be a study which shows, or even like it doesn't have to be like a conclusive study, but just like a study which starts to show that trans women, given any measure of treatment, so we can say like 3 years on HRT, we can even go like surgery, we can even go like whatever you can imagine, like any like measure that they can take, they will still hold real competitive biological advantages that are outside the range of what could be observed of any cis woman. Right? So that's like a complicated sentence, but very important. Right? And the reason why the burden is that high for me is because that when it comes to what should be allowed in sports, we're already talking about elite athletes, right? So any advantage that a trans woman could potentially get, like as being a man and then transitioning, should be above what a cis woman could be able to perform, right? If it isn't, then they're just competing within like the category, right? So my issue would be if they're breaking the category and basically going above and beyond what is possible, then I think we need to have a serious conversation about what we can do. But unless we can show that through like some sort of study or research, then I think it's pretty much an even playing field. And you can even say on average, like they might perform better or whatever, but that's not really interesting to me when we talk about elite sports. When we talk about elite sports, we're only basically talking about what is possible from like the human body within like these parameters.
All right,
and
we're
I
gonna move
think
it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I just to conclude.
We're going to open it up for round debate, but yeah, this is just intro points.
Yep.
All right, PrimeCayes, sir, down to you. You got 1 minute. Go ahead.
Sure. John, trans women in sports, right? Trans women are like the Twitch politics, like singularity, like all roads lead to trans individuals and what's going on in their pants, right? So I mean, I guess I'll give you the
One way of putting it.
It's one way of doing it. Yeah.
Oh,
I guess I'll just give you my standard take that like absolutely they should be allowed to compete. They've done studies. They've shown that that if you're on hormone replacement therapy for a certain amount of time, that you don't the advantage is negligible between these people. In fact, a bigger advantage that you might want to worry about is like height, right? Especially in certain sports, like having being taller is the main advantage rather than anything else. So we don't even necessarily have to divide our sports between men and women, right? We could just do it like height or weight class and things like that. And that might make it more fair overall. So I don't. I think this is a lot of conservative, culture war scaring, right? Distract you from what's happening economically rather than actually tackling it face on. This is easy thing, especially when it comes to trans kids in sports, right? Like a group that can't fight back. That a governor, maybe from Texas, I don't know, right, can score cheap political points against and make their lives just more miserable, and that's okay, right? Just for funsies, we'll do that. So yeah, I'm against the bans. I'm against this shift to making the lives of our trans brothers and sisters even harder. So,
Rose, over to you, sir. You got 1 minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have. Are we allowed to address other people's argument, or do you just want us to lay out our own here?
Just lay out your own, then we'll go into open debate.
Okay, cool. So I think that the best way to handle issues like this that maintain, I think, the 3 key important principles when it comes to professional sporting and even amateur sporting, those 3 being competitiveness, fair play, and entertainment. I think the best mold to integrate these types of issues, and that also even, if transness wasn't even something we had to consider, a way that would further bolster these important principles would be to just get rid of gender and sex as like the prerequisites or the main categorizations for sporting events, because those categories are really, really broad. You don't get a lot of specificity, and there is still a whole lot of variation that comes there within that is not a result of the hard work and effort these athletes really put in. So what I do think the best thing to do is to have different categories on the basis of the physical traits that we have kind of tried to get at really remotely and really broadly through the previous categorizations of male and female sports. So looking at things like bone density, maybe muscle mass, maybe lung capacity, maybe like a wide like hormone composition and stuff like that, and making categories on the basis of those things instead of sex and gender and stuff like that. I think that's the best way to ensure competitiveness, fair play, and entertainment, and in a way that is inclusive for everybody to go into sporting and to be able to give it their all and achieve the success that they have on the basis of their effort.
We're going to go over to PrimeCayes Racer. Sir, you got 1 minute. Go ahead.
All right. So the bigger thing that we see with trans athletes coming, it's more the male transitioning to female coming into female sports, and I find that absolutely offensive to biological females. That they're essentially given second place to someone that was born a biological man that still has the characteristics of said biological man. And it's just absolutely not fair. I can't see how anyone could stand for this. It's disgusting, honestly, and absolutely not fair.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and put my own opinion there, and then we're going to open it up to roundtable debate. I told you, Dario, it was going to be way more confrontation or way more freaking discussion. And I'm sad to say it because I think Ukraine is a far more pressing issue. My stance on this, I actually agree with Rose. I think if trans, and I am all for trans rights. I'm a libertarian in the sense I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in everybody's rights. I think you should have the right to do with your body as you see fit. It's your body. I don't think the government should have any right to tell you what you can and cannot do with it. I just don't want to pay for it. And in regards to Leah Thomas's example, this is a guy that placed 400 in the men's division, transitioned over to the females division, and is dominating. You cannot tell me that there are no physical differences between men and women. There is a reason we've had separate sports for years upon years. Rose hit on it. Bone density, height, Prime hit on that. So what Prime's point is, and I see where he's coming from, if we were going to take into consideration bone density, weight, all these things, that's way too complicated. Now you're going to have so many different inner divisions. It's going to be I think the fix to this, without going down this rabbit hole, is trans has its own division. And that way, I think it'd be fair competition. If you're a trans woman, you're competing against other trans women. Because if we really think about it, and you want to get down to how much testosterone they're taking, how much estrogen are they actually taking, this is way too complicated. This has gone beyond the realm of just pragmatic approach to sports, to where now we have so many different subdivisions in it. I think that's an equal fix there. And I also want to bring up the point that if we think there are no differences in regards to the sexes of male versus female, why is it the point I just made with Leah Thompson? What about the Green Beret trans fighter that fought a female and fractured her skull? This guy was a former Green Beret. He was on estrogen, had his testosterone way lowered, and still beat the fuck out of this woman to the point where I'd look at that, it's like, that's ridiculous. Like, I saw the fight. It was insane that this fight was ever sanctioned. And this is a guy that has been on hormone therapy for a very long time. So people making that argument, I don't think you understand that there are still attributes that even an increase in estrogen, go ahead, Prime, after this, an increase in estrogen and lower of testosterone, it still doesn't substitute. It still doesn't balance that fact. Go ahead, Prime.
Okay, so this is a guy. All right.
Yeah.
So we were going to have big disagreements, John. But
Okay.
yeah,
Wait, Prime, you might send some auxiliary fire to me. I just want to differentiate some. So me and John, we don't agree exactly. So what I was saying is that I don't care about sex and gender at all. I just want categories on the basis, so I can imagine some fucking like twink dudes competing with like women if they're in the same like one of these classes. I don't care about that. That's all good. I think they're similar competitiveness. I don't think we should have a different like division for trans women or trans men or whatever. I just think get rid of sex and gender entirely and get at what we actually care about. So I just want to get that out there. Back to you, Brian.
So you think men and women should compete in the same thing?
If they're in the same categories of these things that we find important, if they are in the same groupings of the bone density, of the lung capacity, of these things, that I don't see why they shouldn't compete together.
Okay.
So okay, yeah.
Prime, go ahead.
Yeah, the idea that you would segregate trans individuals to their own sport, so like they don't have a league then. There's
They
not
have
as
their
if
own.
there is a massive number of trans people in the first place, and then despite like the amount of news that the coverage they get, it's surprising, I know, but there's actually not that many of them, despite the focus that they have.
Yeah, it's less than 1% of American population. But if we believe in trans rights, should they not be afforded the same?
They should
that men and women
absolutely
already
be
have?
afforded, so which is why they should be able to be to compete in the league that matches their gender identity, right? Assuming they meet certain medical requirements. And I think you're overcomplicating this in terms of like the different leagues. You're saying we'd have a whole bunch of different subdivisions here, right? You could do it sport by sport and make divisions that make sense, right? That there's a way of doing this. Like you don't literally have to put everyone through a whole battery of medical tests to do these things, right? Like,
you already have to do that for
the weight class would be the big thing, right? Others, it might be height, like I don't know, in terms of like running or something. I don't know.
Wait, the Green Beret was the same weight class as the female and beat the shit out of her.
So what conservatives can
more than
do, and you identify as conservative, John? I don't want to put words in your
No,
mouth.
I'm constitutionalist. I'm not a Republican.
Okay.
You can't use those talking points against me, brother.
No, that's okay. Well, what people on your side of the this discussion do is that they'll point to one or two examples of a trans person absolutely dominating a sport. And it happens. It absolutely does, right? But the vast majority of them don't, right? There was a governor. I wish I could remember which one. I can try to look it up, right? In which it was a Republican governor, and they were doing the thing. Hey, let's beat up on trans kids in sports, right? And a reporter asked them, so what's an example? Like, what are a few examples of trans kids just absolutely wrecking the girls' division, right? Couldn't name one. Couldn't name a single fucking one, right? Because this is just not a thing that happens. You would see this in every female sport then. Someone who is trans coming in and just utterly destroying the competition, getting all the goals. This is like a fever dream, is what it is. It's a fever dream. It's not actually happening, right? But it's something of intense focus. And all of a sudden, I don't know, that like the idea that the sanctity of sports is now something of that's utterly sacrosanct. I think the history of sports says otherwise. The history of cis people in sports says something completely differently. But I'll leave it at that.
But you're also
Prime,
trying to break.
I have a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I just have a question really quick. So you talk about like this, it being a phenomena that you would see all the time. I wonder, do you think that the potential for the backlash that we see has an adverse impact on the trans athlete participation? Like the fear of backlash.
I would say I hear what you're saying. I would say if we look at trans people didn't just start existing when Fox News discovered them, right, and decided they're going to be a scapegoat. They were here for a long time, way before we started having these debates. And if that had been a problem before this current backlash, right, we would have seen this like throughout history, right? Because trans people have, whether you knew it or not, they've been involved in these sports, right, in society in general. So I think we would have seen a large influx of trans women dominating female sports previously, but we haven't. It's just not the case. So it's a boogeyman.
Well, I'm not sure that there's a couple of things that really make me hesitate to say that this, because we haven't seen this phenomena that but the lack of the phenomena means this conclusion. I feel like there's a lot that has changed over the last 10 to 20 years where this phenomena could shift, because we look at what the IOC has done. I think looking at it, this Laurel Hubbard was one of the first openly trans women to compete in the Olympics, even though 2016 the guidelines were updated to allow them to participate in 2016. There wasn't anyone in 2016.
Oh my God,
so it's something that's still relatively.
Can you get closer to your mic, please?
Oh. Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, it's something that was changed in 2016, and despite the change, it was only in 2020 that we saw one of the first openly trans Olympians. And I feel like there's probably more than just this phenomena doesn't exist, or we haven't seen this phenomena to this level. Therefore, my conclusion is true. I think I don't know that I would say that it's something we have to be
what was this
super terrified of.
Could you
y'all can interject as long as we're not talking over each other. Y'all feel free to interject your points wherever.
Yeah. Sure. What was the exact change you were referring to? I missed that part. I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. I actually didn't say it, so it's fine. I appreciate you asking. So athletes that have transitioned from female to male are allowed to compete, and I think male to female as well. I have to double check to make sure that it's just anybody that's transitioned is allowed to compete.
Yeah. So I would say that once again, that doesn't. You may have a rule, and I guess this is on the Olympic level, right? One, just because you had a rule that trans people couldn't compete doesn't mean that they weren't competing, right? So I'll put that out there. And the fact that it only took a few years to find someone who did well within the trans community. I mean, I don't. This is only. You're only presenting me with anecdotal evidence that doesn't compile.
Well, let's talk about evidence that you discussed. Then you said that this has been going on for a very long time, but I do agree with Bryce. The fact that it's becoming more in the public eye. More people are coming forward, more wanting to compete. This one-off that you're claiming is going to happen more frequently, and it's going to bring more eyes on it. And I also want to go back to the fact of what you said as far as conservatives and the beating up on trans kids and things such as that. I do not feel comfortable with my daughter competing against a boy in a wrestling match. I don't feel comfortable with my daughter sharing a locker room with a man with male genitalia. I do not feel comfortable with that. I do not want that for my child. And until my child hits the age of 18, I am that child's legal guardian. And that's what I want for my child, especially when my tax money goes to paying for that school and I have a say in that. I don't agree with that. Now, if trans people want to have rights, I fully support that. But there has to be a split. There has to be some compromise down the road to where it's now, in fact. These are issues, and please don't take this as me accusing trans people of being rapists. That's not what I'm saying. Because when that argument came out as far as transgender bathrooms, I understood that. I was yeah, trans, just like when homosexuality became very prominent in America, it's oh my God, they're going to rape your kids. That's actually not true. The fact of it is, though, there's still an issue. There is still an issue, I feel, in the sporting arena of what you've just said, saying these anecdotal one-offs. These one-offs are happening because trans people are competing more. They're hitting the spotlight. I shouldn't say that they're not afraid to anymore. It's that they're taking that more role, that more progressive role in these sporting events. And I respect them for it. If that's what you want to do, do it. But I think to sit there and try and minimize it because it's been happening for a long time. These are just I disagree with that.
I have a question for John. Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So if you agree that the main narrative behind the trans women in bathrooms thing isn't really true, then what's your opposition to having a trans woman be in the women's bathroom? What's your opposition to that?
The opposition?
Yeah.
Well, honestly, it's so we have to talk about are they post, are they pre? These are these things of what's their sexuality? What are they attracted to? I mean,
so should,
and I understand. Exactly.
I
see your point there, and I will concede that to you there as well. So I'd have to say that's a complicated topic to discuss, but I have to say if you're post-op, Man, I think that delves into the realm of we start talking about psychological issues there in regards to whether you feel it's gender dysphoria or whether you don't. And it's not saying me one way or the other. It's me saying that this goes down a rabbit hole to where you have to dissect the differences there. But as far as where I stand right now, once you're 18, bets are off. Do whatever you want. When you're not, I disagree with it because I don't even think children should be able to. I remember I debated Vasha on this, that he is pro giving hormone blockers to children. I am against this. I am totally against this. I feel this is child abuse. And it's not that I'm trying to deny a child what it is they want to do, but I understand, and these governors that Prime had talked about, I'm not sure if you're referencing DeSantis and we talked about the Don't Say Gay bill, or if you're talking about something else. I don't want to put words in your mouth here. But I feel like there's a lot of misinformation going out there, disinformation, but essentially it's protecting the youth. It's protecting the youth in a sense of like you have to be 18 before you can get a tattoo. You have to be 21 before you can go drink. I think to do a permanent surgery or take these hormones to affect that change your body, you have to be of the age of consent.
Okay, I have a feeling. So we can talk about the child abuse hormone blockers, but that's a separate topic. So I think we should try to focus on this, and then maybe if we have time, we can move on to that. So
absolutely.
I still didn't quite hear a reason there. So so we agree that the main narrative of like trans women going in and like sexually assaulting cis women in bathrooms or whatever isn't true. So then I would like to know, what is your opposition to trans women being allowed in women's restrooms and women's changing rooms?
I think it goes back to the idea of trans is that's what you are. You should have your own category. I'm not opposed to that.
Why?
I think you.
But
honestly,
why shouldn't they be disallowed in the women's?
Because here's the deal. So why shouldn't they be allowed? So why shouldn't a trans female be allowed to go into a women's locker room? Are they post-op or pre-op? What's their sexuality? And I understand that doesn't apply.
Okay, but hold on. Sexuality, we both agree doesn't matter, right? Because we wouldn't be like, okay, lesbians, you go here.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, sexuality, we're gonna throw that out the window. So let's say you have someone who's male to female, they're NTF, they're trans women, and so what's your reasoning for what restroom they ought to be allowed to go into?
No, not restroom. I'm talking about locker rooms. If it's a private restroom, I really don't care, honestly, because if you're in there by yourself, who gives a shit?
Okay. So
but as far as locker rooms, look, I'm not trying to offend people here, but it's a man. He has the chromosomes of a man. It's true. You cannot deny science. It's the very same people that sit there and say, stop denying the science, follow the science. The science, the chromosomes are what they are. The DNA is what it is. That is a man. That is a male. So if a male wants to go into a female, biological female's locker room, I'm firmly against it. No, it should not be allowed.
But why? You're just stating your conclusion. But
because a lot of it is basis from sexuality. A lot of it basis from.
But we agreed sexuality wasn't a thing, right?
I'm talking about that's what it stems from. Why have we always had the split between male and female locker rooms, male and female bathrooms? Why have we always had that?
So
because normally, back in the day,
about the gay people and stuff like that,
the overwhelming majority of people were heterosexual. Now we've had a shift that has come about in this long term, or where we're at now, wherever you want to call it. But where we're at now is, I feel like a lot of women don't feel comfortable having a penis in their locker room. As Leah Thompson's teammates have actually openly said that he has a penis and testicles, and he walks around nude in their bathroom, and they don't feel comfortable with that.
Okay, if we were at the stage where gay rights was at the same stage as trans rights is right now, and I came up to you and I was like, no, I don't want lesbians in women's restrooms because they're lesbians and they don't belong there because there's would you accept that argument? Do you think that was a good argument?
Yeah, rephrase that again or restate that, please.
So if I'm against lesbians being able to go into women's restrooms and gay men being able to go into men's restrooms and changing rooms, I should say, because that's what we're talking about.
I thought we said sexuality wasn't the case.
Yeah,
the reason I brought it up was from historical purposes of why we've always had a separation.
Okay, so what is your reasoning? I'm still confused on what your reasoning is right now for like
in regards to a woman not wanting to see a penis in her dressing room. Yes.
Yes. So what's
and vice versa.
Okay.
Are you for kids? Let's not say. Are you for co-ed locker rooms to where you're showering, changing together?
Yeah. So mixed. What's it called? Gender neutral. I'm not sure what it's called. Gender neutral changing rooms and restrooms. They're number one. They're very, very commonplace in Europe all around. And number two, they don't seem to have any particular
gender neutral restrooms or showers.
Restrooms and like just changing rooms as a whole. They seem to be.
But those are individual. Fine. Those are you're alone by yourself. We're not talking about community showers like in a locker room, a common gym locker room.
I'm pretty certain some gender-neutral changing rooms are like that as well.
That's fine, but I'm talking about you're an individual. You're by yourself. There's nobody else in there with you. I would not feel comfortable going into a locker room and having a naked female there with me, because there is that air of sexual attraction for me, and also there is the respect that I feel
but you
comes
go
from
into sexual
culture.
attraction again, which is we both recognize
The
doesn't
overwhelming
matter, but you
majority
keep
of
bringing it up.
America. No, well, I'm saying in reference to how America historically built, we had that separation, but the overwhelming majority of Americans are still heterosexual, so that factor is a big issue. Yes.
Okay, so do you
But in
think
regards
that
to your argument,
sexuality is a good reason to exclude people from changing rooms?
exclude people from changing rooms? No.
Or-
Are you talking about? Rephrase this. Are we talking about changing rooms or locker rooms? Changing rooms are by yourself. Locker rooms,
okay.
it's open to everybody, like a gym locker room. If you're talking about a changing room, I don't care. You're by yourself. I mean, realistically, if you think about it, we already have that. Any woman could walk into a man's restroom. We do it at a bar. When the bar's full and the restrooms are full up, I'm going to the woman's restroom and taking a leak, but I'm by myself. So, I mean, that's just a sign. But if we're talking about a community thing, then yes, I think at that point it comes down to what the overwhelming majority of people want. And the overwhelming majority of people don't want that.
Okay, so in that one of these public ones, then, do you think that lesbians ought not be allowed in women's public changing rooms?
Now you're talking about sexuality. Now you're making an individual, and I see what you're saying. Yes, they should be, because they are the same sex as them.
So my issue is they should, but the issue is we agree on this, but then when I ask you for the reasons for the trans thing, you loop back to sexuality and you give this example of like, hey, if I'm a man and I'm in a changing room and I see like a female in my room, there's going to be the air of sexual attraction. So you bring back the sexuality, and then when I ask you about sexuality, and you're like, okay, no, never mind, that's not a good reason. But then I ask you, so we're just kind of we're stuck in circles here.
Okay, let me clarify. I see what you're saying there. I understand that. I'm talking about in regards of. Okay, let me rephrase this. You're talking about a woman that is post-op. She's already had this, or the man that is post-op has now become a woman, changing in a women's locker room. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, that's one of the answers.
I'd say leave it up to the gyms. Leave it up to the individuals. Let the private business owners choose.
Well, how would they know?
How
I
would
guess
they
that's
know?
what I'm.
That's another good point. They wouldn't.
Yeah,
So again, I guess honestly, it comes down to the
So,
business.
I think see what my problem is, and I'm sorry, I've jumped up in a race car. I'll jump in after me.
I got you, bro. I got you.
My problem here is that like I think you're the one, John, who's making something completely untenable, right? So one, we have to have the separate sporting division for our trans brothers and sisters, right?
Yes.
Because of reasons. Two, you're saying
it's not so simple as reasons. Like, don't discredit the argument there. The argument is
it's
there is a
discredited.
clear definition. These aren't minimal discrepancies. These are major discrepancies. These are issues that men have way more bone density, way more muscle mass.
I've acknowledged that.
But when you phrase,
but
when you phrase the argument as if it's like a minor cosmetic detail, these are the major details why I disagree with this.
I've acknowledged that, and I've already given a possible solution as to how exactly we could deal with that. But
and I understand that, but when you phrase it as if, or when you frame it as if it's not that, you see what I'm saying? I feel it's a little intellectually disingenuous there.
It's just that I've heard these arguments many times before, and actually it does. I think it is discredited. I don't think it is a very good argument at all. I think this is what again the basic scare points that people are using, right? Like, so look, this idea
Why is it a
about
scare
like
point? Nobody's trying to scare anybody.
When you're calling, yes, you okay. So maybe,
where's
I'm not
the scare
I'm not going to
tactic?
put words in your mouth in your intentions, right?
If you take a look at your chat, John,
using
there's quite a
words.
bit of scare tactics going on in your chat right now.
But that's not.
yeah,
Oh
but
no! Wait,
you're
hold on!
using
Wait! Rose, to your point, I don't control the chat. I've asked the chat to be respectful. Their opinions are there. They're not mine. I don't condone what they say because I don't know what they're saying.
You're talking about the rhetoric as a whole.
No. Hold me accountable for what I say, and if I'm wrong, I will take full accountability on that. To go back off of Prime's thing, you said scare tag. Then you're about to double down on it, and then you pull back. If that's your stance, your take, I fully respect it. I am not trying to scare anybody. I am not trying to be bigoted towards anybody. I simply want an even playing field for men and women. That's all I want. And fairness across the board. So let's put this into context perspective. I'm not trying to scare anyone, and I'm not trying to take any, because if I was trans and I had this urge that I wanted to go play football or I wanted to go swim, I'd want to do that. But I think it has to be fair across the board. That's where my stance is. So forgive me for cutting you off, Prime. I wanted to make sure we were clear on that. I'm not trying to scare anybody, and I am not Fox News. I am not a Republican, because when you said your side, there are many things I disagree with Republicans on. So when you lump me into that category, as you've done a few times tonight, I just want to set the record straight. I am very different from the GOP. I used to be with them.
Yeah, so I want to be very clear. When I said that your side, I meant your side of this argument. I checked if you're a Republican. You told me no, so I accept that. Sure. I think that so I won't put any intentions on you. All right, so I won't state your intentions.
Thank you. Thank you.
But what I will say,
I'm coming to you as a good faith actor here, or good faith arguer, debater.
I understand. But I will say that the rhetoric that you're using is the same rhetoric that people who do have that intention, I'm not putting that on you, but do have that intention use, right? Saying
but Prime, we could even say the same thing that Hitler breathed air, you breathed air, you must be Hitler. I mean, there are acorns in these topics that actually have some truth to them. But just because these alt-right people use them and then I'm using the same ones doesn't discredit the point in and of itself.
Sure.
Just because white supremacists
I get that.
say one thing, that's we have
to have
clarification
and I'll respond to it. So again, I think I'm not saying just because the other side of views is being discredited, that doesn't make sense. How can you even have a conversation if the other side of you, the person on the other side of the argument, is always invalidated because they're on the other side of the argument? That's not what I'm saying, right? Okay. I'm saying that in terms of those similar tactics, saying that a man is in the dressing room with my child, right? That imagery invokes something, right? That doesn't come out of nowhere, right? And it leaves a certain impression. So
we've got to be clear on that, though. When we say man with a child, that's not what I said. I talked about boys in the dressing room with my daughter. That's not a man, that's a boy.
No, you said men. You did say
if
men.
I said men, let me go back. I'm not sure if that's what I said, but let me clarify. I mean boys. Like if I don't want a boy in the same dressing room as my daughter, my girl. Let me clarify that. Now, men and women, because like I already said, I said when you're 18, all bets are off. Now you're an adult. Now you are the age of consent. So that's where I think the differential lies there. So when I say man, excuse me for saying that, I mean boy in the changing room with my daughter, or locker room with my daughter. That's what I mean. I should not say, I'm not trying to sit there and say transgenders are out there raping kids. I'm not saying that. I think that should be individual case by case basis. It'd be like saying, oh, that dude shot that guy, he's black, all black people are violent. That's not the argument that I'm trying to pose whatsoever. I'm saying if that transgender rapes somebody, he's a rapist. It's not because he's transgender, it's because he fucked in the head as a rapist, as a human being. That's the point that I'm trying to make. It has nothing to do with your sexuality.
But you keep going.
Bryce has got to go. Bryce has been waiting for like I can see this.
Interject.
Sorry, I'm not done. As Rosevis has stated previously, right? Like you say, it's nothing to do with sexuality, but you keep circling back to sexuality in terms of like
in the
I
past,
don't have that sexual attraction. Like you saying you,
because
John, would have a sexual attraction to a woman within a bathroom. So like you it seems like you're sneaking that into there into the argument.
No, I'm saying historically,
but
historically speaking, that's why we've had this separation of men and women, because heterosexuality was the prominent sexuality. Homosexuality was not embraced shit until like the 70s. Fuck, I want to say like early 90s. 80s it was still verboten because the AIDS scare with we won't go in. But the point being is, historically speaking, due to sexuality, due to attraction, we had the split. It was always the case.
The danger for women, the danger for women and for girls, right, has always been cis men. Has always been cis men, in terms of their safety, right? And the danger to men has always been cis men. In terms of safety, the cis men are the ones who end up victimizing people, right? Like I'm sure you can find one or two examples of a trans individual, right, who has committed some sort of
I think if you're going to make a statement like that, you need to have some facts behind that
type situation, right? But the vast majority has been cis men.
Wait, hold on. Wait, you're saying you're using anecdotal examples here. Unless you have science, you actually have data to support that. That's a very baseless claim you can make, because I see news stories all the time of a transgender involved in this, and I see stories of a gay person or a straight person. I need to make sure I understand
what you're saying. Are you saying to me that there even is a possibility that trans women, right, outweigh cis men and the amount of sexual crimes committed either in this nation or in the world?
Now you're just rephrasing the argument. You're argument.
You said stats. Do I need to show you stats for that cis men?
No, I think there's a miscommunication. I just think so as well. Like, you don't have to go down this
Yeah, I think we're going down a rabbit hole that's like.
Feel free to interject.
Bryce has got to go. Bryce has been waiting.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bryce.
So, I think, with all due respect to both of you, I think this whole topic is fucking stupid, and I think I don't think so. I think it bears discussion. I'm sorry, but I feel like the whole bathroom thing, all this stuff, is a pretty simple and closed argument. Like I think that we're really just kind of reopening and rehashing arguments that have been had to the up to
Okay.
degree, and it doesn't really have a lot of relevance to the sports thing. And I think Rose may have actually touched on something that I really wanted to talk on. So I think that what is a comparable, a reasonable middle ground is that you could do something like what the combat sports do. He listed a number of ways that you can like measure someone's physical performance, and like what if prior to whatever event the trans athletes are tested in for like I don't know what it would be, like lung capacity, like whatever the conditions are for the physical performance, and if they meet like whatever class, then they compete with men. If they don't meet the class, then they compete with women. And we create this like threshold for where there that like 9, 10, or 12% of like excess or advantage that even like trans women have, or like women have over men, or sorry, men have over women. Then like I feel like this creates like a really reasonable system where you can be like, okay, like right now for whatever reason you have a disproportionate advantage, like you have a marked advantage over, and hey, maybe that even means that like some like actual women get like transmitted, like it's not a perfect system, but at the same time like it's still, because the reason why that I think that we need some kind of like comprehensive testing system where we create like either like a weight class or like some kind of classing system where like, yeah, it'll increase the complexity, whatever, but it'll deal with it, is because there is still some credibility to the idea that like we have a lot of sports where there's safety concerns, right? You have rugby, you have combat sports, you have other sports where when trans athletes are competing with women, there's a report from the World like Rugby Association that has done a study where they found that trans athletes that compete with women in rugby sports, the women athletes have increased risk of injury. So I really feel like, is this like a trade-off that we're willing to do? Like for the inclusivity, are we willing to increase so like all of women's risk to injury just because we want to be inclusive? And also, I feel like conditions, like I feel like it's better to talk about like what conditions, where's the threshold, like all these things, like have some kind of like substantive conversation that actually gets some output rather than the same shit slinging that we've seen for like years.
Can I offer an olive branch? Because
Yeah.
I think we
I don't
could
hate
all-
anybody, by the way. I don't hate Prime. I don't hate Roadnut. We just disagree. That's all it is. I
Oh,
don't
yeah,
hate
yeah,
anybody.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Nothing
hated
but love,
all of
man.
you on a deep and personal level, and I'm being so
Shut up, you
genuine.
goddamn Amsterdam fuck.
No, actually, because actually,
Yeah, go ahead.
I wrote this thing that Race Car said actually, and that was maybe like 20 minutes ago or something when you spoke. But I think it's very important, right? And you said that you don't want women in competitions to basically essentially be given second place, right? You said that, and I actually agree with that, right? Yeah, and I actually agree with that, right? And I think if that was the case, I would 100% be against like trans women competing with cis women. If it was just like whenever there's a trans woman, oh, best you can do is second place, right? And I don't want to live in that world, right? The way that I view it is more like I try to conceptualize in my head, because I again, like, just basic qualifiers, right? 100% that there are physical difference between men and women, right? All of those things. Like, I'm trying to be very reasonable, right? And I don't think somebody who is like a man today and then just goes to like an event and says, "Oh, I'm gonna be a woman for this event or whatever," and compete. Like, I don't think that's reasonable. Right? I think that's dumb, and like, think nobody should accept that, right? What I'm saying is, I view the category of women's sports, I view that as a category of like biological traits, right? And I think what we're essentially saying is we accept cis women to be within this category, and then what is possible for characteristics for cis women to have should be able to exist within this category, right? So in terms of like height, you should be able to be you can only be as tall as the tallest cis woman, right? You can only weigh as much you can only have as much muscle as the most muscular like cis woman, right? Like that's the category, right? And I think when you exist within that category and you are a trans woman, I think you should be able to compete, right? If you are not the strongest woman, if you're not like the tallest woman, or whatever, like if you're within the category of woman, like by all biological measures we can have, and like you're on like 3 years of hormone replacement like all of these things, right? And we can see you not just like literally destroying every single woman, then I think it's reasonable that you should be able to compete within the category.
You see,
I don't
I have
think
to
that's a
disagree with
reasonable
that in a
standard.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because here's the other part that people don't realize is that I'm on testosterone replacement therapy. I actually take steroids, and it brings my testosterone levels up to where they actually should be due to my prolonged combat experiences and shit. A lot of veterans deal with low testosterone, so we have to go on TRT. And what a lot of people don't seem to, or they fail to understand, is if a trans woman, male going to female, and they're on the hormones, you do realize that you can inject testosterone and then come off that, cycle off it, your T levels drop way back down, and you can pass the test. But for before then, up until that point, you can be injecting copious amounts of testosterone, grow your muscle, all that stuff, come off of it, your shit drop, estrogen levels spike, and then it balances. That's what I'm saying. It's not so simplistic as if they're on these hormones for a certain period of time, you can manipulate it.
But they
And
do
it's-
continuous
it's-
testing, though, John.
But
right?
but-
You know that
Yeah.
they do continuous
but-
testing, and that's like the requirements. The requirements isn't like passing.
But we're
one
talking
test.
about like
It's
a
like-
month or 2 months cycling
No,
on testosterone,
They're talking,
right?
and the testing regimen is like 6 months, and then for the Leah Thompson one,
Wait,
right,
every 6 months they get tested?
No. It's like a continuous test. Like you have to report these tests, your T levels, I guess, continuously. I believe I think in most sports it's 6 months. Please don't quote me on this, but like I think for most it's 6 months or something. And it was like I think if I'm remembering this correctly, and remember I didn't prepare for this, but if I'm remembering this correctly, like there was a controversy specifically dealing with Leah Thompson, and that for her sport they decided to massively expand the number of years. Like you had to like have continuous positive, I guess, tests, right, or negative tests, I don't know, passing tests, like that. It was like way beyond
You
what
guys
the
can
medical
interject
community was recommending. So like it's not just a one-time thing, right? They actually do test continuously, and I imagine for the reasons that you're talking about.
But that's like once they decide to take that route of a professional athlete, what are they doing prior to that? That's the point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah, that's.
I understand what you're
So,
saying.
a lot of trans women, like even if they've been for hormones and surgery for a really long time, the advantage of the time that they had before they started their transition and being able to train, and in this case if we're talking about trans women being able to train in an ostensibly male body for all that period of time, it incurs advantages that do last for long periods of life, sometimes throughout your entire life, that you can't really do much about. Now I have a bit more to add to this. I want to talk about Dario's burden and his standard for, okay, well, if a trans woman, she cannot be more physically.
You said Dario's burden.
Dario's burden. Dario's threshold.
man's
Whatever.
burden. White man's burden.
Dario's burden. Yeah, exactly. I don't think this is a good way to do it, because what you might end up then is, sure, yeah, you have these one cis women that really stick out in the field. So for example, if you're talking about running, you can talk about Caster Semenya, who is a cis woman and had so much testosterone that the Olympics were like, hold on, can she fucking compete? Like, it's nuts. And they tested her so many times. Perfectly cis women, no supplements, no anything, but she had crazy amount of testosterone. So what are we gonna have then? Are we just gonna have Caster Semenyas and then a bunch of Caster Semenya-esque trans women? There's a lot of cis women in there. They're gonna be like, well, fuck, And as somebody who really likes a lot of the principles of sports, of competitiveness, of hard work, of fair play and stuff like that, that doesn't sound good to me. So instead, and this is the mold that I want to hear some people disagree with, see if there's any issues with that, because I haven't heard any yet, where we should have a system where you have categories similar to weight class-esque, but a lot more comprehensive, where you consider things like bone density, lung capacity, hormone, balance, and all these different things. And then you make these categories, and then from there you kind of be like, okay, regardless of sex, what we really cared about with sex anyway was these things. But instead of going through it by sex, which is like an indirect way of going to it, we just go for those traits directly. And you have categories in that regard, and you're like, hey, I don't care about your sex, I don't care about your gender. Here are the physical attributes that we think is going to be important for your ability to perform in the sport. We're going to put you in one of these categories, and that's where you're going to compete. And I think that's probably the best, most fair, most competitive way to do this. And I would love to hear people who disagree with that model.
Okay, so I don't disagree, obviously. What I disagree with is the characterization, right? So obviously, I think I 100% agree with you, right? In a future scenario, like this is what I would like to see probably, and I think it's probably good for like all of sports, right? But I don't think that's like necessarily the same discussion that we're having as in terms of like, should trans women compete in women's sports, right? I don't think a satisfactory answer for me is just let's change all of sports, right? While I may agree with that, I think that there is some merit to that argument. I think that fundamentally addresses the concern that people have. And I do think that Dario's burden is actually a good argument, right? Because I think trans women competing in women's sports is only an issue if they're winning, right? If trans women competed in women's sports and they were getting crushed, they were like a thousandth
Wait,
place, like they were
Sorry,
like
I need to interrupt.
placing 1,000 or like,
I'm really sorry. I really need to interrupt because I really think that's something that's not entirely true. If you, because what I'll pose to you is the World Rugby. So in like rugby, trans women are banned from competing. Is that okay?
no, okay, great. So obviously there are other issues like safety concerns or whatever, but I think that's like a minor part of the discussion. And if you want to say safety concerns, right, I don't necessarily disagree with that, right? I think we should address safety concerns, obviously,
Where did
always.
the safety concerns come from?
What do you mean?
Like, where did the safety concerns come from? Is it because of the difference in the biological makeup between a male and a female?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But that's
where
what
where the biological
I agree.
female is more likely to get
Yeah.
hurt.
I agree.
Yeah.
Right? That's why
So
I
shouldn't
said
that apply when a biological
It
male
should.
that transitions to female then plays in a female league, then puts those biological females at risk to getting hurt because they're playing with a biological male?
I do
That's-
wonder why we haven't seen any
I-
trans men competing in the NFL or sports like that and like dominating.
I don't know. It's
Yeah.
it's a mystery.
Yeah.
to me.
Why do we still have?
It's a
women
mystery to me.
and-
Why? I mean, if trans is like Prime said, this has been going on for a very long time. We didn't know about it. Why have there been no trans men dominating in male sports? Because if you're on testosterone, you're at the same advantage, correct?
I mean, oh
So,
shit.
so first off, right? I don't think at the top level, I
Sorry.
don't think we're ever gonna see trans men compete. But I do think, and
Why?
I only have
Shouldn't
and
matter
because-
what level though.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
if we're on the hormones and the hormones make a sequel, there's no. I'm
no.
arguing Prime's point here. I'm just simply
Right.
saying, why have there been no trans men dominating the male fields?
Okay, so it's a fundamentally different discussion, right? In terms of like what is
Okay.
possible for a trans man or like a trans woman. I don't think anybody is gonna be arguing that trans men are gonna be destroying men's sports. I do think that fundamentally, like I only have one anecdote, I guess, but I've heard fuck, I don't remember his name, but he played like lacrosse basically on like a college level, like at his college or whatever. And he was competing fine with like all the cis men or whatever, like a trans man. Obviously, this is not the very top level, right? But it does happen, right? There's a lot of variance between people, right? And that's ultimately the point, right? And like race car, I started out by saying I don't think that somebody should just be able to go like, oh, I am a woman now, and then fucking destroy all the women's sports, right? That's like I am against that, right?
No, I get that. Yeah, that's absolutely irrational, and any common human being should be able to go. Yeah, that's a really dumb idea.
That's weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, if me and you, we can look at two individuals and say, biologically, like their muscle mass, like their bone, like whatever criteria you want to put up, they're like pretty similar or like within the same range. Like I think they should be able to compete with each other. That's what I'm saying, right? Like I'm not saying, oh, let's take fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger, who just became a woman or whatever, and put him in like the 18-year-old. Like,
I had the worst mental image from that.
yeah.
Oh my
Like,
god,
put him
Seriously.
against, like,
they
a
make them look
18-year-old
like a bunch of girly
category of,
men.
like
Screw
yeah,
your freedom. Screw your penis.
So I feel like
Yay.
I feel like all of this kind of ties into what I was trying to say, that we have to come to some kind of like, probably the scientific and medical community have to come to some kind of consensus on like a threshold. If we can create some kind of threshold for the different criteria, and it's probably going to be on a sports by sports basis, right? Like the criteria for like a swimmer is probably going to be different than the criteria for a track athlete. And if you can create some kind of like a testable condition, like a feature of the physicality of the athletes, and then create some kind of threshold, you can probably set a degree where like, okay, so you're like your threshold, it's just like weight class, right? Like the best comparison I can imagine is that I feel like Rose Wrist was onto something there, and that you have a weight class. If you exceed the weight class when you're at the weigh-in, you there's like a caveat, like there's a sorry, not a caveat, there's a concession, like they're like that you didn't meet weight, and the same thing could happen with the trans athlete. And I think Prime pointed out that there's like regular repeat testing, so they have like a informed baseline of what the levels of these athletes are before the event, and if the levels are like anomalous or like above the threshold, then they just compete with like the men before the thing. And I feel like this is really simple. Like, granted, like the specifics are going to be up to like the scientific and medical community, but I feel like this is still like a very simple, open and closed case, because like we have to do that, because as much the sentiment is great, like I think everybody can agree that we would all love everybody to be able to compete equally, et cetera, and everybody to have like inclusive sports and so on. But like we have a lot of cases where there are like safety concerns and other things like that. So we need to create these like thresholds and like conditions and like features or like phenomena that we can test for.
And on the topic of thresholds,
previously to Briss, just that before you had said the argument that John and I was having was dumb or stupid, but actually I don't think it is. I think we were dealing.
I think he meant in comparison to the sports analogy or the sport. I think he wasn't calling that. He was just saying that we veered off. Yeah. That's my understanding.
So. Back to
one or the other. I think that what we were discussing gets to the heart of the matter, right? I think for so many people, and again, I'm not putting words in John's mouth, but I think for a lot of people, that the opposition to trans people in sports comes to the opposition to trans people in general, that they're very uncomfortable with them, and that it comes out in arguments like the trans bathroom situation. Where it gives us a very intimate example of people interacting, and you find inconsistencies in the arguments. So that's why I really wanted to examine that, because it has everything to do with everything. Like I think for so many people, if you actually interviewed them, if you dug down on them, it would circle back around to this, to the trans bathroom debate, right? To like how I feel about trans people in general. Not for all, but like that exists.
BX, you can interject whenever you want.
BX needs to go. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to.
No, I dropped the. I dropped the.
I saw your chat message, BX. I'm ready. I'm ready for your chat. Let's go.
Yeah, I totally disagree with what Prime is saying. I don't think it has anything to do with disagreeing that people should be able to, live their lives in a way they want. When it comes to the athlete thing, I mean, this has nothing to do with not liking trans people. Like, for example, if we're talking about the Leah Thomas situation, right? When I saw this, I was so confused that I actually went and kind of dug farther. And I don't know if you guys already mentioned this, but Leah Thomas testosterone levels were like twice as high as they were supposed to be for the NCAA rules, I think it was. But there was some loophole that got her pushed through so that she was able to compete, right? Even though she had way too much testosterone, right? And you can just look and see that, So it's apparent. The other thing I would say is I don't agree with well, then why don't we just make it to where it's about your lung capacity and your muscle strength, because those are all attributes that competitive athletes work and train hard to improve so that they have an advantage. So if you're just competing against people with the exact same physical stature, that takes out part of the element of the entire competition. What's the point?
Okay, let me address that exactly, because I really wanted counter arguments to the categories thing. So let's talk about this for a minute. So let's begin. So things like bone density, lung capacity, and hormone makeup isn't something that an average athlete can just influence with that much ease. And if it was true what you were saying, that okay, well, these are things that athletes want to strive for anyway, then we wouldn't see things like we see with the boxing weight classes. So even though, technically, if you want to throw the hardest punches, you're going to want to be a heavyweight. You're going to want to get as much body weight as possible behind your punches. But turns out there's different levels of competition. There's different levels of strategy. There's different types of entertainment. There's different types of dynamics that occur at different levels of physical stature within different competition, within different sports. And some people are more suited to some people are suited to others.
You're using weight class to frame your argument. Your weight class is this differential there, but it has nothing to do with throwing a harder punch.
If anything,
hold on.
I want to go back to my argument better than the other things, because it is infinitely easier to change your weight class than it is to change your bone density, lung capacity, or hormone makeup.
But you can change your lung capacity. Though.
Yeah, you can change. Wait, hold on. Bone density, all that comes into actually your fitness regime. You do realize that you
Yeah,
can
but do you think
affect
it's
that through training? Absolutely,
you can, but there are
Yes.
very, very strong, and there is like a very like significant biological cap to your genetic makeup in regards to where you can
100%, yeah,
come there,
because you
as
plateau
compared to
naturally.
things like as compared to things like weight, which
But
are
you're
highly
hold
movable.
on, you're deflecting to a different statement here. The statement you originally said was actually
Mhm.
incorrect. Lung capacity, all that was actually incorrect. You can influence that. You can change that through more
I never said you
strength
couldn't
training.
change it. I said it's significantly more difficult to change than things like
But
boxing.
that's what athletes are competing in these. They're competing in very difficult situations there. So I mean, I'm not sure what your point is there. But the other point I want to go to is the boxing example. BX is going to hit on this. Is that you're separating based upon weight class. You do realize that professional fighters that are actually really strong do everything they can do to cut weight and go to the next lower weight class so they can dominate.
Right.
Has nothing to do with throwing the strongest punch. That comes into fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fibers, which what you train for. So what you just referenced actually discredited your argument.
No, no,
You're
no.
basing
The
it just only
purpose-
on weight.
the
Now let's
purpose
talk
of
about
that-
height. Let's talk about on height
Hold on.
and
The
reach.
purpose of that is to
Reach on
demonstrate
swimming or
the
even,
purpose of that is to
ew.
demonstrate the differences in the types of ways that the game changes at different levels. And
Right.
there isn't just like one better way, because heavyweight
Okay.
boxing completely different from featherweight boxing. Nevertheless, both are sports in their own right, and
Mhm.
both maintain a good degree of competitiveness because of the way that it's structured. If you
Mm-hmm.
threw in, if you were just like, fuck weight classes, we're just gonna do male boxing. It's gonna be an absolute mess, you know. I don't want Mike Tyson,
responding,
you know.
You're
like,
responding to BX's point when she responded to Dario in regards to saying that, or it was Prime. We said we're going to test various different things to bone density, height, all that stuff. Now you've taken out the competitive edge. BX is actually saying different to that, and then you're countering that. So it's like you're countering BX's counter to Dario's counter. And I feel like maybe I'm getting some stuff lost in translation here.
Yeah, all
what's-
I'm saying
what's-
is
what's
that
BX
for
said-
the boxing class, the reason that one of the reasons they do that is for safety. Because if you have a 300-pound boxer fighting a 120-pound boxer, that punch is more likely to land them, kill them. People can die that way. So for fighting sports, a little different than swimming. You know what I mean? Because you're not actually
Now I
two
could agree.
people bunching each other.
So
I could
but
agree
if-
with your point though, Rose, on like height basis for swimming. I could agree on that one.
Yeah, because I want. Hey, if you're like fucking like 5'4" and you have a sincere passion for swimming and you think you can be better than anybody else within your kind of like genetic constraints, just by virtue of the hard work and the effort and the training and the technique you work on, I believe you should be able to be a world class athlete. But under the system right now, where we just like, okay, just sex, that's how we're gonna do our thing. You're fucked. You can't do that. However, if we have categorizations that are based on these other things, that are based on these physical attributes that we kind of semi-try to get at through sex, then everybody has a chance to be a world-class athlete if they can put the work in. And your like genetic things that you can't really do much about, your genetic constraints, no longer play a part in that. And I think that's admirable, and I think that supports the main things that we care about in sports, which is competitiveness, fair play, and entertainment.
All right, real quick, I hate to end this, but we have to go into end discussions. So each of you is going to have roughly 2 minutes. Number one, closing statements. Please, again, remember, no jabs at the other panelists. Just address the topic, your stances, and also make sure you tell everybody where they can find you at on social media. So we're going to go ahead and start this with Race Car. You've got 2 minutes. Go ahead, please.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'm Because Race Car, and you can find me on twitch.tv/Because Race Car, spelled with a Z, not S-E. But yeah, no. When it comes to the NCAA and like your competitive levels of sport and professional level, because like that's where the whole transgender like really muddies the waters. Once you get to where I play hockey at, all roads lead to beer league. After that, it doesn't matter because then they sort you by skill level. So up until, oh god. I just got a follow notification. It just like blared in my ear right there real quick. But yeah, up until then, like absolutely everything that has to deal with like your chemical makeup of a human being has everything to do because you're trying to get the advantage. And when a biological male transitions to be a biological female, you're absolutely, you're creating a very unequal advantage in that situation. And I think honestly, we could ask the cis females how they feel about it instead of trying to silence them. So, and with that, I yield the rest of my time. And cheers.
Cheers. Bryce, over to you. You've got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. So I think that I maintain what I said in the opening statement. I don't know. I don't think that there's an easy answer to this. I think that Rose was at least on the cusp of like the good direction, the good like conversation about these things. I think that to the credit of John and probably BX and Racecar, there are significant concerns with the example of rugby and like safety of athletes, and significant concerns like combat sports, and significant concerns in like a competitive integrity in like swimming, where there's like literally a larger wingspan and like just simple physics of these things impacting it. And we know that unfortunately, like even after like there are a bunch of like meta-analysis studies, like systematic studies, like really comprehensive wide studies that show even after like 36 months that these athletes still have like a bit of an advantage. So there's a like a really complex, like nuanced conversation that we have to talk about. We have to set some kind of like conditions and like testing, and try to find a way to fairly and accurately organize these athletes so that we can preclude having like these shit show headlines like Leah. And I think if we do this, we can avoid moments where you have people like John talking about how there's a dude in the locker room, like a trans woman saying that and saying that there's just a guy in the locker room with his dick hanging out.
I meant boy. I shouldn't have said man. Excuse me.
It's okay. Yeah. Aside from that, like that's it. I don't know, but good to talk about.
Where can they find you on social media?
Oh, yeah. You can just find me at Bryce Live, BRYSLIVE, on Twitch.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and move over to Rose. Rose, you've got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Yep. On this topic, I'm still going to stay by my stance of the categories. I think that's probably the best way to solve these issues. It solves safety concerns because everyone's going to be more or less within a grouping of physical prowess, which is going to reduce a lot of the safety concerns that we've heard being talked about all the time here. It's going to pretty much exactly solve this entire issue of like, okay, well, how does trans stuff and that entire discussion link in with sports, and what's the role of gender in sports, and what's really going on around there, because sex and gender will no longer be the major thing influencing. We will now get at what those categories were meant to study, which before in the past we were unable to do because we simply lack the science, we lack the information. But now, especially in elite sports, we can do with, I think it's definitely possible to do. Now, a lot of research will need to be done to this, but there are significant and prominent sports analysts that have talked and have laid forth this exact idea that I'm talking about. So it's far from some niche thing that people on the internet just talk about, and that's all. To address some of the things that major problems that I've heard people address when it comes to my prescription here. One of them is that, oh, no one will watch. Well, we already have a lot of issues with people not watching the kind of like when it comes to physical prowess, suboptimal groupings for competition in these sports. A lot of times it's the women's division. So this is by no means some criticism that is like exclusive to my system by any means. But also there's the fact that, hey, different physical constraints will cause different playstyles. People watch different playstyles for different reasons. People watch heavyweight boxing for some reason. People watch featherweight boxing for some reason. The different physical constraints cause different playstyles that some people might find more interesting or less interesting, or you have different groupings there, but there is something for everybody in there, which I think is a positive thing. Then there is the argument that, okay, these are characteristics you will want to affect anyway. Cool. I get you. You can affect them to some extent, absolutely, through training. I don't think it gets that, or I don't think that's a significant flaw in anything that I'm talking about. You will just have more, up to par things between the different groupings and who's competing, but you will still have the overall records or whatever. So if you're just trying to get as buff and as yoked as possible, you can still hold the overall record, sure, but you're not going to be competing against, people that are way smaller than you, which was the safety concern we talked about before. And once again, things like bone density, lung capacity, and hormone makeup are way more difficult to change than things like boxing weight, yet we still accept boxing weight as an acceptable way to do categorizations when it comes to, aspiring these things of fair play and entertainment and all these different things. So I think that the categories is probably the best way for us to run this right now. As for me, my name is Roserist. I'm a social democrat. I'm currently, I'm a European. Wow. I live in Amsterdam right now. And if you want to find more of my stuff, I can recommend my YouTube. That's where I post most of my content. It's Roserist, so 2 words, rose like the flower, wrist like the body part. And thank you very much, John, for having me on.
Absolutely. You said you're in Amsterdam for now. Are you moving?
No, I recently just moved here from Sweden, actually, to study at university. So yeah.
What are you studying?
I'm currently studying sociology.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
Sorry.
All right.
Wait, what did he say? Wait, what did that?
I said sorry to hear that.
Okay, well, hey, I'm taking economics courses as well, some psychology courses here and there. So, I like the other stuff as well. It's interesting. But yeah, for some reason, Amsterdam sociology program is like nuts for some reason, like compared to the other universities, like global rankings. I don't know why. So, I'm pretty happy with my choice and I'm enjoying it all. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right, BX, down to you, ma'am. Go ahead. You've got 2 minutes.
Yeah, sorry about missing the entire conversation.
Yeah, so you got 1 minute. You're only here half the time.
Yeah, the whole categories thing to me doesn't make sense, man. I mean, how are we going to have, the bone density category is up next? I mean, it sounds a bit impractical. And I feel like, it's not only impractical, but there's no practical way to actually implement that, because imagine having to test all these athletes for all of these different categories and putting them all into all of these different categories. It doesn't make any sense, first of all. The main thing is, though, I think the number one thing that irritates me is when people go, if you don't like this, it's because you hate trans people. That is such a low blow argument that doesn't actually rely on facts. It's completely emotion driven, right? If you don't support this, you're a transphobe. That shit pisses me off. We have actual thinking behind what we're saying. It doesn't mean we hate anybody. We're just trying to throw out our concerns. And to have them invalidated by people calling us a transphobe is honestly, as a woman who is an athlete, it's honestly insulting. And then I would also like to add that if men are going to be, or if biological men are going to be able to compete in sports against women, and take hormone therapy to level the playing field or whatever, but then ultimately you're still going to let them compete even though their testosterone levels are double what you set your criteria as. I think women should be allowed to use performance enhancing drugs to try to narrow the gap. But ultimately, I just don't think it's fair to boil everything down to you're a transphobe. I think that's the weakest argument that people make in this situation. I think that it hurts the trans community when you point fingers and call people transphobes just for pointing out issues and fairness in sports or safety in dressing rooms. Like these come from fears that our kids might be in danger, or that our daughters might not be getting a level playing field, or when they enter sports. Like, this isn't because we hate trans people. It's because we're concerned about our own interests. Buddy. It has nothing to do with you. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say.
Where can they find you on social media?
BX TV on Twitch and YouTube. Please go check out both of those places. I stream both of those places. I have a lot of cool videos up on YouTube.
All right, we're going to go ahead and go to Prime. You've got 2 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that I think there have been a lot of misunderstandings of trans individuals, even within closing statements. I feel like it's happened that we have a lot of misunderstandings as to how they live, what the implications of them are in society, and like what they are. Right. I see this constantly. I guess I've had this debate so many goddamn times. It's unbelievable. But I think that we wouldn't have such a huge conversation for such a small group, right? I don't think we would have a news channel, from several news channels, that would dedicate so much airtime to this tiny group. If there wasn't something else behind it, other than the sanctity of sports, because who gives a shit about that? Who gives a shit about the sanctity in sports? To this level, to this degree, no. This is a one-day news story. If it's about the sanctity of this is this is Pete Rose, like a cheating scandal. This is what that is, right? The reason why this is constantly brought up, right, that it evokes so much emotions, is because there are a lot of fears behind that. I think this trans group, is an easy one to beat up on. They have no power, so it's just super easy. Before I thought it was our gay brothers and sisters, right? But they were the easy target. And now that they are being more accepted in our society, we've moved on to the trans individuals, because there's even less people to defend them. So I don't accept that there's nothing behind it. No, it's just the facts, it's just the science that we're worried about. The past and the present doesn't bear that out. So you can find me on twitch.tv/PrimeCayes, PrimeCayes, as it's spelled on the screen right here. Twitch.tv/PrimeCayes. Also YouTube, same name, PrimeCayes. We are streaming on both. We are gaming on YouTube and on Twitch. We're always doing political stuff. So we're gonna have a big debate tomorrow. Actually, I'm just announcing this. It's gonna be a tournament debate, and it's gonna be a prize pool. All right, over $1,000 in terms of the prize pool. So that's happening tomorrow. Come check us out. We always got more content for you here. We're streaming 6, sometimes 7 days a week. So please check us out at this channel. Thank you so much.
Wait, hold on. Is that legal on Twitch? Can you do that?
To do to do
No, gamble.
Well, we're not gambling. It's not a gamble.
No, it's a winner takes a prize.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just, okay, I wasn't sure.
We're not
Dude,
gambling.
I'm walking a fine line on social media, so I want to make sure I don't do anything fucked up.
We're not
If
gambling.
Trainwrecks can just run slot machines on
Yeah.
the front page, I think, I mean, to be honest, Prime could probably get away with it.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And I
Yeah,
just want-
it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like
I didn't know that.
Oh, hold on.
thousands
No,
of
there's
dollars in
very
slot machines
strict,
on-
Yeah,
there's
I
very
know,
strict
yes.
guidelines on gambling.
Yes.
I just
Yes.
wanted to
Then
say
with
quickly,
guns
though.
and shit like that, I was like, I don't fuck with it. I don't want to.
I think it's because Trainwrecks is in Canada. I think that's why he can.
Yeah, he
I-
had to move to Canada, I think.
I just
Where's
saying
an
that,
Aiden Ross
John, I really
and-
enjoyed being here. Thank you so much for having me on. It was
Absolutely.
a fun experience, and I'd love to come back in the future.
I'd love to have you back. I appreciate you being here. Last but most certainly not least, we have Dario. Dario, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Oh shit. Yeah. Yeah. I actually really enjoyed this discussion. I think it was better than most discussions on this topic. I guess I'm a bit sad that I didn't get to discuss my idea more, because I actually think that's an idea that can bring a lot of people together. Like even people who are like skeptical, I would say, about like trans women and women's sports. So essentially, my point is that I think the category of woman presents within itself like some characteristics, right? And we might not completely agree, but like we can all envision what it is to be like a woman competing in sports. I think most people can, right? So what I'm saying is basically that if you can compete on an even playing field with women, I think you should be able to compete in women's sports, right? That's essentially the point I'm trying to make. And I think that the way that this could work in practice, I mean, we can figure this out, but like one way could be like boiling down like what are essential biological factors like which we consider women to have, which has influence in a given sport, right? So for example, with swimming, we can see that women athletes like that compete at the highest levels, they have a maximum of like this height and this reach. And if you are below that, then you can compete in this category, right? If that is like the essential characteristics of this category. And if you can't, then you just can't compete within the category of women, right? In women's sports. I think that's simple. I think most people should maybe be able to agree with that, or at least see the logic there. And yeah, that's, I guess, yeah, that was my argument. Anyway, my name is Dario. I don't really do my own content as much, except maybe a little bit of YouTube here and there. I go on panels to talk to interesting people who disagree with me, and I really enjoy these types of panels. So thank you for bringing it back, John, and I hope I can do more of them.
Well, to all my panelists here tonight, you are invited to stay in the Drunken Debates Discord server. That's who I pull from here on out. So when I put out a call, because it'll grow, because the people that I invite on here, they go through a selection process. All of you here were recommended by other streamers that I know personally that vouched for you. So I appreciate you here. I appreciate your ability to, like Prime, I love your ability to articulate your points and you break your stuff down. Rose, you as well. I respect the hell out of you both for sitting there and saying, you don't root a lot of your points in emotion, and you back a lot of with your own facts, and I appreciate that. Dario, always have my respect. I met Dario, I forget on what debate panel. Love the guy. I love it. And we are so different politically, but I respect the fact that this guy, again, much like Rose and Prime, lays his shit out there. And the examples that I feel like your types make in the conservative side of the house is I can bring on these Republican meme account owners, which I've done in the past, and guys like you I can rely upon to shred the fuck out of them because you know what you're talking about, even though in some cases I disagree, and you back a lot of what you say in facts, whereas in most Republicans that I know do not. It's emotional-based arguments, and I'm not condemning Republicans as a whole for that, but a lot of these mainstream Republicans out there, these figureheads, don't know the art of debate. They don't know what they're talking about, and that's why I would love to get them involved in these debates, because it's like, if you are so sure of yourself, go debate this point. Let's see how much you actually know. So I respect the opposing side of the political spectrum from coming at this, not so much an emotional, but more of a fact based in your own words, and I do appreciate that. To Race Cars, first time, BX repeating, Bryce, first time coming on. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for spending your evening with us. To your streams, if you're watching, thank you. I apologize. I have told my chat there will be no fucking hate raids, no negativity. You respect the person, attack the idea. So if you get any bleed through over on that at any of your streams, write down their names and I'll ban them out of mine, because I'm not going to tolerate that shit. That's what Drunken Debates is about. We get fucked up, but we have really good, intellectual, fun debates. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you for being here. And it will be back next Saturday. Panelists, I'll shoot you all some messages in the Drunken Debates Discord. If y'all want to come back, you are cordially invited to come back. And I appreciate every single one of you. So I'm going to bounce out of here, talk to my chat for a second, and then I'm going to end the stream. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a very good night.
Thanks for having us once again.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Have a nice evening, everybody.
That was a good one.
Later, y'all.
Yeah.